either live by the gun or you die by the sword.
Welcome to The Good, the Bad, and the Weird. I'm Nico.
And I'm Chris.
And today we are tackling our very first ever Spanish film.
Yes, a beloved film.
Much beloved, and probably a lot of our introductions to this director specifically.
Yes, and also, no. Yes and no, depending on who you are. But definitely this was like my mother's big introduction to him.
Yeah, this was also one of those ones where it was it came out, so do you want to say the movie title?
Yeah.
Okay. We're doing Pan's Labyrinth. Probably the best known Spanish movie that most Americans know.
And for a lot of people in their top 5 movies of all time.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, this is one of the very first foreign films we really got my dad to watch and sit down and enjoy. Well, my mom did, I didn't, but
this was a first for a lot of things for my mom. Mm-hmm. This was her first true foreign film that wasn't like an ancient classic that she had to watch for something specific. This was one of her first films that she knew that this was by Del Toro. Mm-hmm. And then this was also one of the first ones that my mother came to me with and was like, this movie was weird. You're gonna love it. I actually liked it. Normally it's, you're gonna love it. I'm never watching this again.
I fall under that exact same category.
Yeah, that's the norm of where my mom and I's movie relationship is. This was one of the few ones that she legitimately actually really enjoyed. Has she watched again? I don't think so. But she would if she remembered it existed.
Yeah, no, and I mean, it is one of those ones where I feel as classic as it is, it still doesn't always come up constantly.
No, I think for a lot of people, this was in one of two camps. You either saw it and recognized it as magnificently good, mm-hmm. or you saw it and this hit that sweet spot of dark fairy tale that you like.
Yes.
And thus it's in your top movies and you watch it all the time.
Yeah, it kind of falls into how when we did the gritty fairy tales, mm-hmm. where it doesn't really hit that gritty level. It's
close though.
But yeah, it
toes that line between gritty and horror.
It's a dark fairy tale. And yeah,
yes.
that's the exact same, that's the exact thing, is that it's not really even a horror film, but it toes that line. Exactly. I think that's why a lot of people like us really enjoy it.
Yes. And so there's a group who undoubtedly watch this movie every single mm-hmm. year. And that's the same group who watch Edward Scissorhands every year. Yeah.
No, yeah. It has that same kind of
it's a special niche.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And so, for those who don't know, Pan's Labyrinth is a 2006 Spanish-Mexican fantasy war drama mm-hmm. that was written and directed by Guillermo del Toro.
A man who we talk about a lot.
Oh, yeah. I love
most of his works.
Most of the stuff I've seen, but he also produces and does so much stuff.
It's hard to keep up with the guy.
A little bit. And even in Visitation, Elijah Wood's podcast, they said it was hard to get him down for an hour to talk.
Yeah,
because the dude was back and forth. Because I also found out every 6 weeks he goes back to his hometown to visit family.
Good for him.
Yeah,
what a dedication.
I know. And the Spanish title of the movie is El Laberinto del Fauno.
Yes.
And I apologize if I butchered that.
Yeah. Putting it out now. While I do know some Spanish, my Spanish is terrible. My pronunciation especially, real bad.
Mine is all food related.
Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah, and so it stars Ivana Bequero, Ariada G, Sergi Lopez, Doug Jones, and Maribel Verdu.
Yes.
Of these, the only ones I'm really familiar with of the Spanish actors and actresses is Bequero. Mm-hmm. She is in The New Daughter that you and I actually watched together because you were over for one of the lads' nights.
Yes, yes.
And as well, many of us have seen Doug Jones, but not actually seen him because he's in a bunch of Guillermo del Toro movies, and I learned Billy Butcherson from Hocus Pocus.
Yes. That's probably the only time people are going to recognize facial features of this guy.
Mm-hmm.
But have you seen a movie with a cool-looking monster that was all mostly prosthetics? Probably him.
Tall and lanky monster.
Yeah, but I don't know, the man is a special effects hybrid master.
Mm-hmm.
And not just like, oh, he makes them, but like, it is a special skill to be able to be a monster on film, especially in practical effects world.
Oh, yeah.
And he does it so perfectly that his rap sheet is an astonishingly quick change act.
Yeah.
Of faces.
Well, and on top of that, so he for those who don't know, he is the Pan and the Pale Man.
Yes, he is.
Or the Faun. I think I referred to him as the Faun most of the time. This outline. But he did not know any Spanish. He's the only American actor.
And he was one of 2 people who spoke English on set. Del
Yes.
Toro being the other one.
And so he did deliver his lines in Spanish, almost constantly blind, and they still had to dub over his voice because even though as good as he was, there was someone who they were picking up like some of the inflections weren't right. And so like...
But don't worry, all of his hard work was not wasted because the man that they had dub over him said that because he bothered to really learn the lines really well, it was really easy to dub over, and the lip sync was really well done.
Yeah.
To the point where, honestly, if I hadn't researched that, I would not have known.
Oh, yeah, because even Del Toro's like, well, you can just say whatever, and we'll just dub over it.
And he's like, no, I've got 5 hours to sit in this makeup chair.
Exactly. You're going to see my mouth move. It's going to work.
Yeah. Well, and then this is the part that, like, drives me even more crazy with this guy, because he learned all those lines, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he also had to learn all of the lines for Ophelia, because the robotic ears and eyes actually moved and blinked. So he couldn't hear her talking most of the time, so he had to memorize her lines and his own so he knew when to talk.
He is... Of the actors, they're all good, but he is, once you start diving into all the stuff he had to do, he is by far the most impressive in this movie.
And there's a reason why he ends up in a lot of Del Toro's movies.
Yes.
They are similar people.
Exactly. And speaking of similarities, Del Toro describes Pan's Labyrinth as a sister piece to his 2001 film, The Devil's Backbone.
Yes.
Which is set 5 years prior to Pan's Labyrinth. As well, he has some. It has some themologically tied.
Yeah,
that's not the right word, but
I know what you mean.
Tied to his very first movie, Kronos.
Yeah, so some people call this the third in the set. Some people call it the second in the set. Doesn't really matter. What does matter is after The Devil's Backbone, he was so unhappy with how the translation for that movie went. Mm-hmm. So all of the subtitles for this movie, Del Toro worked on himself. So you know that when you're watching this one, unlike a lot of animes we watch, you're going to get a very nice translation.
I think newer animes do a better job.
I have found those to be even better because now people know just enough for you to go, okay, I know that word and there's that word down there. And then once you start learning more, you're like, ooh, we roughing it.
It's once you learn sentence structure, because
exactly.
It's very much the same way in German, where it's like, that's not that exact word, but it makes better sense. It's like 3 Days to Die, where like the actual German name is, or the Austrian movie's name is, in 3 days you will be dead.
Yes, a beautiful name. Rolls off the tongue.
Exactly. But speaking of the trilogy, the unrelated trilogy.
Yes.
Most of our sources come from the Criterion collection of this.
Yes.
So, which I have the whole trilogy, which is awesome and beautiful artwork. But I wonder if in The Devil's Backbone, because I wanted to rewatch that one, I just didn't have time before recording. I wonder if they went back and redid any of the subtitles for that.
As far as I know, they haven't, but for the Criterion, since it's special, there might be.
They might have, yeah. But it's a very interesting connection.
Yes.
As well as he has this very intense interest in lore and myth that prepped him for.
Yep.
Even just starting Pan's Labyrinth, because I think it took him like 10 years to write it all and get the entire mythology figured out.
Yeah, partially because he kept just writing bits of it in like the corners of his notebooks. So he had several notebooks that just scattered around, and he's like, I've got ideas for it, but like it's not a thing yet.
I have that exact same problem. I've got little scraps of paper all over my apartment that have random
same
chunks of ideas.
At the end of college, I had to go through all of mine and cut them out before I threw the notebooks away.
I should probably do that too. But anywho, and I knew Del Toro has this intense lore. I love to creating lore because our buddy John and Brit Attacks stream group, he loves Pacific Rim.
Yes.
And he has told me how much lore there is on that. Like, it is an intense amount of lore that I had no clue. But outside of that, I do think there's a best way to go into the analysis of this movie, and it comes from a series of discussions with Inkheart's author, Cornelia Funke and Del Toro. Where Del Toro mentions he comes from a very Japanese concept of damaged beauty, or wabi-sabi.
Mm-hmm.
And I know wabi-sabi's become a bit of a buzzword now.
But also remember that Del Toro's been pulling this theme for a long time.
Yeah, and I mean, architects have done it too, like Louis Kahn with...
Oh, for sure.
Letting whatever damage done to the concrete, as long as it wasn't structurally damaging, as part of the aesthetic of his buildings.
Mm-hmm.
But he also puts that the fairy tales are not judgmental. They just happen, and it's where magic and reality become one. They're meant to transport and provoke.
Mm-hmm.
As well, Del Toro explains some stuff, but not fully, because he thinks that Hollywood is over analytical.
Yeah.
And we are. I mean,
for sure.
We as Americans, I've noticed that, and me trying to actually write stuff, I become very...
Yep.
political / very ideological instead of letting stuff happen. Like, and
it's hard to just have a thing be.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And also, he mentions in the commentary that Pan's Labyrinth is full of detail that he doesn't even fully explain.
No.
And that we can just dig into it as we want.
Yes. And I like, this is a movie where throughout the whole thing, the twists and turns, it is set up like some of the other movies we've talked about, where theoretically you judge the ending for yourself and it's supposed to speak to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I like Del Toro's approach with this movie for this very specifically, because he went through, the details are all there to support whatever side you want,
mm-hmm.
but he already knew the ending himself.
Yeah.
He's not afraid to tell you what the ending is, but he prefaces that with, it should speak to you.
Yeah.
And if it says something different to you, then that's okay.
Yeah. And I mean, he and here's the difference between him saying like, hey, here's what this is, or here's what I think it is. It rings a little bit differently than, say, something like Inception.
Yes.
Where he's like, well, maybe it's this. He's like, no, this is what it means to me, but you're open to interpretation.
Yes.
I mean, that's the point of this.
Yeah, and I think the real strong like line in the sand
mm-hmm.
for me, especially between Inception and this one, but I think this divides it even harder from some of the other ones we've talked about.
Yeah.
Is he builds up evidence for himself in his own movie for his own ending.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, it's ambiguous, and we'll go through that more on where some people differentiate here and there. Dumb computer. Shush. But at the same time, at no point can you look at him and his writing and his directing of this movie and say, no, you're definitely wrong.
Yeah.
You've missed this big plot here, or this point here, or this detail here.
Yeah.
Were there details missed? Yes. But were they mostly aesthetic? Yes.
Yeah. And a good point too. Like, I mean, there were stuff like, because I've rewatched this movie a handful of times.
Yeah.
And every single time, even in rewatches, and just like me flipping through stills to find stuff, I'm like, huh, that's a little detail that I wasn't picking up on before.
Yes.
Like, and especially since like this movie has a little bit of a weird spot in my life. I saw a good chunk of it on a soccer trip for Europeans. Back when we had portable DVD players and whatnot.
Back in the day.
But I stuck with it a little bit. It wasn't a fan of it at the time, like, because I was reading, and I hadn't gotten over that little 2-inch hurdle of
and like,
subtitles.
Also, this isn't a very beginner-friendly reading on a soccer
mm-hmm.
bus with other people talking at the same time sort of movie.
Mm-mm.
You really want to be, fully entranced in the music and, and the scenery.
Well, I think we started, stopped it, stopped it, so it was one of those things.
This isn't a soccer bus movie.
Yeah, my buddy Kyle and I were more interested into the Cosmopolitan magazines they had in the hotel.
Yeah, that sounds like a soccer trip.
Yeah, just the really stupid questions of like, that's made up?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, the best.
Yeah. And so, before we dive into the movie, what are we drinking today, Chris?
Well, today we have delightful whiskey on the rocks.
Yes, Highland Park, 12 years.
Ooh.
Prost.
Prost.
Or salute.
Salute.
I think that's the right way to toast in Spanish.
I have no idea.
I now that I'm saying it, I had a mental note to write that down and I completely forgot.
Same.
Yeah. So, Pan's Labyrinth. Yes. We open up on a heavy breathing as text appears, the setting of Mountains in Spain, 1944, as rebels in woods fight the fascist regime.
I think this opening feels different depending where in the world you are.
Yeah, well, and as much as, well, and here's the thing. So, I bitched at Battle Angel Alita with opening with text. I think this one opens up differently because it is historically based.
It is.
So it's giving us information that we have a little bit of knowledge of, whereas if you go into Alita completely blind,
yeah,
you don't know anything about it, and this is only just setting it up. It's not even really going into too much.
True. I also think this one, because this is supposed to be a fairy tale style movie, which you know from the get-go because all of the movie posters, which we'll get into later, like you're set for a fantasy sort of thing. So to have it set in a real time and real place that is happening during a very momentous time. And I think this also helps give those who aren't familiar with this time period in Spain more context to go back to later. Yeah. Because especially for those of us who have the delight of a American public education, this date and time and place probably didn't mean a whole lot while watching the movie until after you went back.
Well, it was all around the time of D-Day and the American Allied forces landing and finally starting to push back.
And you have to remember that, like, all of the American school, like, history lesson is all through a very strange, weird filter that already sets this time and place to be fairy tale-esque as opposed to, like, terrible war problem-esque. So, while I'm normally not a fan of the text at the beginning setting the whole scene, this one, unfortunately, a little bit necessary because some Googling was necessary when I first watched this.
Well, and also, I don't know a whole lot on, like, this Mexican side of it. I know they mentioned that it's like the Spaniards in it were saying this is a Spanish movie written by, or this is a very Spanish movie.
Yes.
What of it's Mexican? And Del Toro was like, I'm Mexican.
Yeah.
Like that's what's
the Mexican part
about it.
Well,
but I don't know how much that has an influence on Mexican history at all. I don't have a whole lot of knowledge about Spain past their original fall in the Habsburgs.
And I think that's why this opening, even though it's text and my least favorite way to open a movie of all time, is so important because now that you like can go back and look at this stuff analytically, you have a specific place, you have a specific time to go back and like reference.
We have a setup already of the good guys and the bad guys.
Yes.
Because it's very almost Star Wars like where we're explained, hey, here's the rebel forces, they're rebelling against this fascist regime.
Congrats, you have re-looped Star Wars back onto its own self.
Yeah. Yeah. And also at the time, the rebels were actually allied with the Allies in the war. So, yeah, it has historical context, but that's the end of it. Like, it's just setting it up.
It is setting it up, and thankfully this movie doesn't rely on you having a ton of foreknowledge. But if you have it, it definitely makes the dark parts of this movie much darker. Yeah,
it's like when I watched Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Yes.
And like there were a couple people who watched it in the office, and I'm like, hey, did you notice like how creepy and like foreboding that opening song? They're like, no, I didn't really notice it. I'm like, that's a Charles Manson song. That is just putting that right up at the front of the movie, guys. Like,
yeah, but if you didn't know that, you miss it.
Exactly.
Or it changes it a little.
Yeah, and also I have to thank Spotify for releasing his Charles Manson's music.
I have mixed feelings about that.
It's not bad. It's just
he was though. He was a terrible, terrible human being.
He was. Singing about peace and happiness.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Hitler had a dog.
True. And so from the text, we have a close-up of blood running into a girl's nose.
Yes.
And we're introduced to a fairy tale princess escaping an underground world and dying in the real world.
Yes.
So some things I noticed when watching this, because it had been a while.
Mm-hmm.
The underground really feels rather Gaudi-esque.
Yeah,
like,
doesn't it?
Very Spanish influence of like that organic architecture.
It's that beautiful, like almost breathing of a building. Yes, I love that.
Yeah, and also because colors do play a big role in this, and obviously I would not have really noticed it unless it had been really pointed out to me.
I'm so glad that you found this info.
I found it because Del Toro talks about it in the entire commentary.
Yes, he does. He points it out very heavily.
But in a good way. He's not like overly obsessive, like, oh yeah, I did that there and that there. He's like, okay, yeah, here's where it's melding. Here's where we see more of it.
Yes.
He does a very good job of explaining.
He does. He does a very nice interview.
Oh, he's fantastic. But what I like about this is initially we start off with the dull colors being in the fairy tale world, but the bright warm colors once we get outside the church and into the countryside.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this reversal of palettes and this kind of play on like the grass is always greener, where it starts off with the fairy tale princess thinking the world above is a much better place.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I love it. It's a very nice detail. Yep. Also, a wonderful color palette of mostly greens.
Yeah. And the little bit of reddish brown of the church brick and stuff, which is also an interesting nod to that. That's kind of what happens with these types of regimes, is that's one of the first things to go is these historic centers.
Yep.
But from here we cut to a mother and daughter being driven into the mountains, and the mountains are start off very dreamlike. Like if you've never been there and like, oh, this is the first time we've gone to the countryside.
They feel very like time period magical.
If this was an American movie, a stereotypical American white movie, it would be a lovely couple on the countryside. Oh, look at the cows.
Yes.
Isn't that lovely?
And then you get really tired of smelling the cows.
Yeah. Yeah. Unless you're my brother's dog, that he's like, ooh, yes, give me the
Dogs do not count.
And so from here, they exit because the mother gets sick. The girl starts wandering into the woods where she finds an eye, a stone eye, and returns it to old screaming statue.
Like you do.
As a bizarre bug comes out, and it starts acting rather differently from a normal bug.
It's not a standard stick bug.
No. And so here's why I think not only establishing the text was important to ground the movie, because it does start off very fanciful.
Yes.
Because it turns the fairy tale later, because Del Toro does not really talk. Well, he does talk about the bug specifically.
Yeah.
But he mentions things become less magical as they adapt to the real world. Mm-hmm. And so he wanted the insect to be a guide, so like she starts following it, kind of thing, kind of like Navi from Legend of Zelda.
Yeah.
But it's also this weird and interesting perspective of like this child's point of view, because as far as we know, and it keeps repeating, of no one other than her reacts to these creatures.
Yes. And this is one of the smarter things that, because this whole movie's smart, but this is on the smarter end of the smart scale that Del Toro did with this movie, is she's also the only child in the whole movie.
Wrong.
Minus the baby.
Yes.
He does not count. He cannot say a thing. He's alive for a handful of days.
They make noise, but it's unintelligible.
Not a lot going on.
No.
I'm not sure at that age he can see. So...
Yeah.
So he's not helpful.
No, not at all. But also, it's important to note that Del Toro settled on the aesthetic for the fantasy elements to be very ancient and kind of forgotten by time. Mm-hmm. And he settled on a Celtic design, as they had originally extended to the Spanish islands, which, one, I did not realize that the Celts, as we talk about the Celts in general, we kind of refer more to like the British Celts and the Gaels. But I did not realize that the Celts had been in Spain and mainland Europe and potentially originated in modern-day Austria from around 1800 BC. Or not 1800, 800 BC.
There we go.
Yeah, which weird little bits of like history knowledge that it's just like there's so much shit out there.
He's a nerd, and he throws it into all of his movies.
Yes, and I love him for it.
Yes.
It is great. But it also kind of makes me think of like that a weird start to like an RPG. Where like it is very Legend of Zelda-esque where
there's a lot of parallels with this movie and Legend of Zelda.
Yeah. Finding the stone, accidentally releasing some shit.
Rule of threes.
Yeah. Lots of threes.
A lot of rule of threes.
There is a weird amount of like magical thought put into this movie.
Yeah, I love it.
I do too. It's fantastic. Because from here we arrive at an old mill where the color palette immediately begins to dull.
Yes.
There's still some greens in the background, but it still is relatively dull. And this is also reflective of the tone, as the Colonel we're introduced to the Colonel. He wants everything his way, makes it very clear that Ophelia is there because her mother brought her, pretty much.
You mean Captain Dickhead?
I refer to him as something else down the line.
I hate this man so much.
He is the worst. And he is very much the fairy tale villain, but also step-parent.
Oh, 110%.
And it's this interesting, like, reversal of, like, gender roles that we normally don't see as much in the super classic fairy tales.
There's a lot of, like, dead sweet father and terrible stepmother, but we finally get a terrible stepfather who is a terrible fascist.
He's awful.
And this is how you know this character is so terrible. The actor who played him, Segre Lopez, he was known in other parts of Spain for being a comedic actor.
Oh.
And when they were casting him, people were coming to Del Toro and they're like, I know you don't know this because you don't work in this area a whole lot, but you know, he's not going to be right for the role because people are going to see him and think that he's going to be funny. He's not going to be able to do this seriously. And Del Toro looked at him, he's like, oh no, I know. I don't care.
Yeah.
He's going to play it. And then after they got done with all of his shots, Lopez was like, yeah, I couldn't really add anything to this man to make him more terrible.
No.
I had to work with exactly what they gave me. He's the worst character I've ever played in my life.
Oh, yeah. And there's like a level of like, because normally this may be problematic. I like the characters that are spread the fuckery, as I call it.
Yeah,
the real dickhead characters who are intentionally dickheadish.
The Lokis.
There's a level of cruelty to him that is awful.
Yes.
Because it's not like, I think that's the thing is that here's why I think it is too, because it's not like Ichi the Killer where it's like cruelty just for the hell of it. These characters are fun and stupid. It's because this is set in such a realistic setting.
Yes. There's such a precedence for real people like this person that you're like, no, there's no room for you to even have a witty one line.
Yeah.
You are terrible to your core.
Exactly. Because, I mean, and to start off, he wants, I think her name's Carmen. He wants Carmen to sit in a wheelchair for the baby. And she's like, no, I'm fine. I can move. He's like, no, please do this for me. And it's the way he phrases it, too, of like trying to be like sweet about it. But then is immediately like, you brought all those books. Okay.
And this is where having Del Toro be a huge influence on the captions made a huge difference.
Okay.
I don't speak a lot of Spanish, but I do speak some Spanish. And by speak, I mean I listen and comprehend. I cannot spew anything back. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But when he is talking to her, Cameron and Ophelia, he uses male pronouns. So, like, instead of saying, like, a collective of women, he is directly talking to the unborn baby. You're here because my son is here.
Oh.
He doesn't love these ladies at all.
That is a very good catch. I wouldn't have caught that. I
had another Spanish speaker watching this with me.
Okay.
And they went, whoa, did you catch that? We had to rewind it. And then after they caught it, I was like, oh, shit. Yeah, you're right. He doesn't say the, like, polite, formal women's you. He says the one male in the room, you.
Yeah,
The unborn baby male in the room.
Brian's a Spanish speaker, isn't it? Yeah.
He speaks enough.
I forget because I pissed him off because I didn't realize polo is actually supposed to be pollo.
They're very different words.
Yeah. I have no clue what the other one means, but I know I've been saying it wrong for almost my whole life.
You should keep messing them up. That's a beautiful change.
Oh, it pisses him off so much. It's great. And so, from Dickhead, Ophelia spies the bug again and starts chasing it towards the entrance of the labyrinth. One, I love the camera work in this.
I do too.
There's this nice flow to it that doesn't really carry over into the movie, but it kind of does at the same time.
It is one of the top tier brilliance for me in this movie is Del Toro's camera work.
Oh,
because it is almost seamless scene changes. We don't have a lot of cuts and snaps and darks to lights.
Yeah, it's not hard wipes or anything.
No, we have a couple of spots where we go behind a tree to transition. For the most part, this is a cohesive open world.
Yeah. Well, he also referred to the reason he didn't do those types of wipes or anything like that is because he wanted it to feel very storybook.
Yes.
So the page was being turned as you move, as the tree moves across the screen.
And I love it. It feels so natural, and it makes all of this feel less like Alice in Wonderland and more like Cinderella. Does that make sense? Because Alice in Wonderland, from the moment she moves into fantasy world, you're like, this isn't this girl's head. Okay. Yeah, it's a little bit...
It's been a long time since I've been in touch with either of those materials, so...
Fair. We'll rewatch them, because Alice in Wonderland's... gold.
Okay.
But a lot of people like to pretend that, Alice in Wonderland is one of those ambiguous ones where, oh, well, it's not really all in her head. No, it is. It's all in her head, and you can tell because of, not just in the movie, but in the books, as it goes through, it's not a interaction between two worlds.
Okay.
Whereas, Cinderella, all of the magic, fairy godmother, the prince, the carriage, all of that happens in the real world, transitions through the real world, that is current.
Okay.
And this movie beautifully melds those two things for most of it.
Yeah.
And part of that's because of the camera work.
Well,
if there was these hard wipes, you could make an argument of oh, well, now we're in the fantasy world. Now we're in the real world.
Yeah.
And from the get-go, we are just kind of constantly moving our way through the story.
And especially the first two scenes, we see the bug because we don't have those wipes.
Yeah.
It's
the bug
all
is
just
real.
Continuous.
And they see the bug. And they're like, yeah, it's a weird-ass bug.
Yeah, that is
But they
right.
don't recognize it as she speaks to it as a fairy from the get-go. And they're like, nope, that's a weird bug. Don't touch the weird giant bug.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. I see where you're going with that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's grounded from the beginning.
Yeah. But it evolves a little bit. It's like when kids see something and then they make up this whole story that continues after seeing that.
Yes.
Here's what it makes me think of. I've been going down a little bit of a rabbit hole of medieval bestiaries.
Yes.
Where it's oh, we saw this animal do this thing. It's because it's fighting gnomes.
Yes.
Yes.
Pre-glasses time period. How I wish I lived then.
Well, it's just people being described of, oh, this thing pounces or does, what was it? The leopards were at war with the pygmies and stuff. And it's
okay, you wear glasses. Imagine that you were forced to not wear your glasses and then go out into the wild.
I can see well enough.
Can you see well enough to not see gnomes?
Yeah.
I don't know about that.
I
have perfect vision, and I still sometimes walk out there. I'm like, squirrel? Gnome? Squirrel. Okay.
I guess. And so one other thing as well, because there's very little architecturally in this movie.
It's sparse.
But it's intentionally.
Yes.
Because the middle feels very utilitarian and rustic. So especially from the outside, but where the tower-like building they have is facing the labyrinth feels very foreign compared to the original structure. And we start to get it feels like the more you get towards the labyrinth itself, the weirder the world begins to twist, and so does reality.
It becomes more organic in shape.
Yes. And we also learned that, also of note that the architecture and the interior designs of the mill are minimal minus a couple interesting parts.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And above the labyrinth, there is a fawn's head.
If you go back, there is a fawn's head in almost every part of this movie.
Mm-hmm. every part of like the structure or something.
even as the movie goes through important pieces, it's kind of like finding the V in Vendetta in all of the scenes.
Yeah.
I'm not saying there's a fawn's head in every scene. I am saying though that every like important encounter with Ophelia, there is a fawn head somewhere.
Well, and it's interesting too because at the same time it's either a fawn or it's a reference to the female reproductive organs.
Yeah.
Which is very much so
magic.
Well, and the movie's about crossroads, as Del Toro bluntly puts it.
Yeah.
And it's Ophelia is very much at that crossroad of womanhood.
Yes.
Where it's alluded to that she's almost there, but it's not like she's still childish enough.
Yeah, and it's also kind of an interesting like tie back in with her mother, as we'll get through, and also she wasn't originally meant to be 11 years old. She was originally meant to be an 8-year-old.
Yeah.
But the actress was, at the time, 10 when she auditioned, and Del Toro loved her so much, he's like, nope, rewriting it.
Yeah.
We're putting her in.
Which I think works better for the movie as a whole. And there's some things with
symbolism works better.
Exactly. And there's some things that, and I always love it when like directors have these grand ideas, and then shit just doesn't work, or something else comes along, and they're like, oh, we can work with that.
Yeah.
Like, it's like how we talk about in Jaws, where like, if Spielberg had his way, Jaws probably wouldn't have been the classic it is now.
Nope. Because, all of them robots kept fucking up.
Exactly. And also there's this, and I'm surprised I caught this too, because I'm not musically inclined for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
There was this nice musical shift from like the ominous of the real world to like this very mysterious kind of playful tone as we start to get a little bit more warmer colors again.
Yes.
The
entire musical score was based off of lullabies.
Yeah. And
how perfect.
Exactly. There's so much depth to this movie.
It's so good.
Because Del Toro does mention that he wanted to show the fantastic in the mundane to make it feel more fantastical.
Yes.
And he also does this with the camera work as well, where the fantasy shots are more elaborate and playful, while the fascist world is very basic and rigid. There's not a lot of camera change. It is.
Yeah.
But that's what makes the rest of the movie so great.
Yes.
And on top of that, for the maze scenes in the pits, he used a green gel light to highlight the moss and everything to make it more vibrant and alive.
Yeah.
Also just great way also to ground the movie, because now we are at like, we don't even know it yet, but we are at the crux of like, there's been the little hints at us that there's something more going on.
Exactly.
Yeah. But before we get too far into the fantasy, Ophelia's exploration is interrupted by a servant named Mercedes, and the both are called back.
Yep.
This is very good character building as well, because we're still establishing everything. Ophelia is heavily against the Colonel being her father. She also mentions that her biological father was a tailor, died in the war.
Mm-hmm. And her mother happens to be very pretty.
Yeah, exactly. And it also shows her kind of like childlike view of the world, because she doesn't say my mother's pregnant. At least the translation says my mother is sick with child.
Yes. She doesn't see the coming baby as like, I'm excited to have a brother.
Mm-hmm.
She sees this as like the nail in the coffin for her mom. She's like, this is proof that like my time, not just like my time isn't like, oh, I'm now not the only sibling, but like she knows in the back of her head that this is changing her world in a way that the war originally didn't impact her.
Yeah.
But now because of this, because of who her stepfather now is, because of who her brother is going to be,
yep,
this is going to fuck all her shit up.
And it's also her starting to understand the world a little bit more.
Yes. Or at least recognize that it's there.
Yeah, be influenced by the world instead of just kind of inhabiting it like toddlers do.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so at night, the cast of characters grows a little bit more. We learn that the fascist plan, he's planning stuff while Mercedes is, we learn she's a rebel.
Of course, you gotta have one.
Also, there's Pan's head on the banister.
Yes, there is.
And there's also this really change in palette tones once Ophelia hears Mercedes reveal her secret. And this is the beginning of Ophelia's transition into maturity, really, as she's at the crossroads. And we start building the mature themes of the movie.
Yes.
Because now we have all of our characters in place.
Yes, we do.
Yeah. And Ophelia rushes back to her mother's bed after kind of realizing, hey, I shouldn't be listening in on this.
Yeah.
But it also says a lot about Mercedes' character, too, because she could easily, like, I'm gonna peace out of here.
Yeah.
But she's staying because...
her brother needs her, too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But in bed, Ophelia tells a story of a rose that grants immortality surrounded by a series of, or surrounded by thorns that are poisonous and will kill you.
Yes.
And also at this time, this is a really cool like transition. I'm talking about continuous stuff because it transitions from Ophelia listening to the womb to in the womb to kind of through the placental wall or tube into the fairy tale itself, the budding of the rose.
Yes.
And then the stick bug coming out of it and flying into the window. And it's this really interesting like blending because even her fairy tales kind of start off a little bit dark with that hopeful brightness at the end.
Yes.
So it's her fairy tales are already the opposite of the princess we've been told about at the beginning.
Yep.
Yeah. And we also get this contrast of this fantasiful, that's not a word, but we'll go with it. The stepfather is fixing his watch in the gear room of the mill.
Yes.
One, there's all... This again, this is just Del Toro's like level of like building everything because we've gone from her kind of understanding that what the pregnancy is, but not really, but also knowing that stepfather's not a good guy and doesn't want to accept him as that.
Yep.
But it's also showing her naivety as she's still fanciful. She's into the fairy tales and she's influenced by them or she's creating them herself. But it also begins to show her opposition to her stepfather.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also there's this interesting part where the captain talks to the doctor, and this is probably where I probably should have caught on, was that he's already referring to the gender of the child as a boy. He knows it's going to be a boy.
Yep.
Yeah. But yeah, and also there's a carving in the bed. The bed is very intricate too.
Yes, it's thankfully, because there's not a lot else going on in this room. It is a boring ass room.
And that's the thing, is everything that's comforting is intricate in this movie. And it's beautiful. And from all this happy moment, we get our first moment of brutality.
Yes. The true core of this movie.
Where you thought the captain was a dickhead for being mean to Ophelia.
Well, now you learn that he's a psychopath.
He kills some rebels in cold blood.
Yeah, not even like they're getting away, shoot them, but like in a, haha, I shot them.
Yeah. Well, it's not even like, I shot them, like, the bottle killing is brutal.
Yes, it is,
like, it is a very, like,
unnecessarily
cold,
brutal.
but it's personal at the same time. Like,
yes. It is the sort of thing that if this man was real, books would be written about his craziness.
Oh, yeah. And, well, here's why I like this part, too, because it really escalates the danger that Ophelia's really in.
Yes. And
then on top of that, it shows how cold and reactive the Colonel is.
Yeah.
So, because...
like, we're not just on eggshells.
Yeah, and it was all because he was talking, and he told him to stop talking.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is very much what children do. They just talk and talk and talk until they fall asleep.
And sometimes they even keep going after that.
Yeah, yeah. But Del Toro also mentioned that he wanted a juxtaposition of the brutality against the fantasy, so that way the viewer becomes more susceptible to the fantasy,
yes,
but also uses the violence to draw you back into reality. So it's a double-sided coin of, as the violence increases, so does the fantasy as well.
Yes. And it should be noted that while the fantasy in this world is beautiful, at no point is it clean and like modern fantasy. It very much has that Brothers Grimm fantasy feel.
Yeah.
Where like, oh, we cut off our own toes to fit in the shoes, and that's the happy ending. Okay, alright.
Yeah,
good, glad.
And the thing that this movie does with towing the line, well, for one, this killing was inspired by an oral account of a fascist beating a dude's face in for not taking his hat off in front of him. And that was with the butt of a rifle. But also, Del Toro mentioned the bottle itself came from a street brawl he was having with a buddy, where the buddy was getting beat with a bottle and the bottle didn't break like in movie theaters. Del Toro was getting his ass beat with a chain.
Yeah, very good. I'm so glad this man is well-rounded.
Oh, I mean, if you go into, like, if you listen to his history and how he talks about his past, dude is fucking lucky /
Yeah, no, really.
He's
very lucky person.
Oh yeah, and he's fascinating. I have a love for Del Toro.
Oh yeah.
But also it brings, this is the most violent part because we are actually really seeing the act.
Oh yeah, this is one of the few horror / fantasy movies that we don't just see the horror at like the peak of the movie. At no point does the camera turn away from any of the violence in this film.
Wrong. Here's what I was getting to it. This is the only part where we really, really see the violence. A lot of what we see violence-wise is the results.
Okay.
And so there's a little bit of, and here's the thing where the difference between what a lot of people consider really good horror and bad horror and just shock horror is showing it for the sake of shock.
Yes.
Compared to showing the results and letting your mind make up what did he use, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So it forces the darkness upon you.
True.
And not necessarily on the film itself.
Yeah. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Also, there's also a couple things with this where Del Toro mentions that this movie shows that the treatment towards civilians in war as inconsequential.
Yeah.
Because we know the colonel was going to kill them one way or another.
Oh yeah, no, everybody's going to die. For sure.
We realize that they might have had a pamphlet that someone gave them that was just in their bag. They most likely weren't rebels. They probably were just hunting rabbits. Yeah. And it doesn't matter. Yeah, exactly.
Even if they hadn't had a pamphlet, it probably still wouldn't have mattered.
Yeah. And even the colonel's like, you guys wasted my time. You should have searched them better. There were rabbits here.
Yeah.
But we don't know. And that's something to leave up to interpretation.
Sure.
Because I think they probably were rebels, but they were out hunting. They were hunting, but it wasn't for the Sixth Sister. They were
claiming.
Yeah.
I don't think it matters. I think it doesn't matter whether or not they were a rebel or not. They were dead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They pissed off the colonel.
They existed.
Yeah.
They breathed too close to the guy.
Yep. And so, from this act of violence, Ophelia is finally greeted by the fairy again, who changes into her ideal version of a fairy. Again, going back to the point of there's this level of magic that happens in this movie where there's this thought of like your thoughts influence and shape the world around you. Whether that's real or not, it's real to you.
And honestly, you could put that point onto everything in even real life.
Yeah.
Like, it's a really nice visualization of like how we are seeing the world versus how Ophelia is interpreting certain things without making you question whether or not any of it's real.
Exactly. And on top of that, it relates back to that idea that this world, like the old religion, the Pan or the Faun and everyone else that's coming up, has basically been forgotten and has started to become more realistic and turn into like actual physical objects that we know.
Yeah. It's like the old lore where if you sit long enough, you turn to stone.
Yeah. And there are some very like horror like elements to this movie because like the sick bug doesn't just like come up to her. She like puts her feet out of bed and it runs by and it's like, ooh.
Oh yeah, it's a giant creepy bug.
Yeah. It's a child. It's also a childlike horror that still fits with me.
Yeah, well, and like it definitely helps solidify what kind of kid Ophelia is, because not only is she not afraid of giant bugs, like she's fascinated by the giant bug, even when it's running across her bed in the middle of the night. She's also a giant bookworm. It sets up without having to like be a hard stereotype of who Ophelia is.
And that's something that Del Toro does fantastically, is telling you who people are without telling you. As he mentions that you already know she's a reader. She's just carrying books. Like you don't have you don't have
need to know
say,
what she's reading or anything.
Oh, I like reading. I love reading. I love doing this. There's not that exposition, because he also mentions that he hates dialogue.
Yes.
And if he could, he would remove it altogether.
And this is a perfect example of how to have a stereotypical character. Like Ophelia is just a nerdy bookworm kid who's really into fairy tales and bugs. Like easy. Like so many other movies have done that character, but she is not explained in that way once.
No,
she's just Ophelia.
Yep, exactly. Fearlessly herself.
Yes.
But also fun little fact about these fairies, at least the non-bug version.
Yes.
Their first appearance is in Hellboy, actually. Where
Yes, they are.
Their wings aren't made out of leaves, but that's where the idea came from. They're in another Del Toro movie as pickled jar fairies in that. Which I've learned you're introduced to Del Toro either through Hellboy or Pan's Labyrinth.
Yeah, those are the only options, really.
Now, well, probably not so much nowadays, but at least when we were growing up, those were the first two most any of us saw of his works.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. But also on top of that, like, he does this thing with, even though they're becoming more stylized to what we would expect, everything in this movie, even the fawn, is a little bit feral.
Yes.
Because he specifically said he modeled the behavior of the fairies after, like, monkeys, where they're itching, constantly scratching, doing little chittering.
Yes, and this is another part where his choice in words and language really helped play very nicely into this.
Mm-hmm.
Because he uses the word fairy.
Yeah.
But he describes them in more of a pixie style.
Okay.
Which works out perfectly because a standard English audience who he knew was going to see this film, and same thing with a standard Spanish-speaking audience, would have different ideas of what fairy means. Mm-hmm. But because of how he portrays it, you now know, even though that word is different depending on where you are, that connotation is different depending on where you are, you know what this creature is.
Oh, yeah.
You know what it does. You have lore about this thing. It will be different, but it's close enough.
Yeah, and, like, you go to, like, the Scandinavian countries and you have the Hilda folk, and they might not have wings, but it's the same. So there's that common mythology that links a lot of languages together.
Exactly.
But also I think it's interesting, too, because there's been a handful of these foreign films we've watched where I've been I'm not gonna lie, I've been pleasantly surprised because I know the director is not American or English, and they speak English very well.
Yes.
Del Toro is probably the best of them all.
Yes, well.
To the point where, like, I watch all his interviews.
You forget that he is his second language?
Yeah, because I was watching the special features, and I got to, like, his notebook notes. And I'm like, oh, sweet, this is gonna be cool. And then I open it, and I'm like,
can't
cool drawings. I can't read shit, though.
Yeah.
It's like, man, he's just impressive. Yeah. But yeah, that was the thing with the commentary too. I was pleasantly proud or glad that it was in English, because for those who don't know, when we watch commentaries, taking notes in a foreign language
it takes a lot longer.
A lot longer, sometimes twice as long as the movie, depending on how dense the commentary is.
That was actually one of the things that one of the camera guys in a later interview talked about, was how this movie reignited his love of movie making because it was in Spanish, and they filmed in Spanish, and the only person who wasn't speaking Spanish was Doug, and he was like, this is why I originally wanted to do this. It was fairy tale, it's in my language.
Yeah.
This is storytelling.
Yeah. Well, and on top of that, if you really think about it, we're still in that era in 2006 of a lot of the ethnic characters in movies are very stereotypical.
Oh, it was heavy-handed.
But, like, this is probably one of the very first, as far as us white people know, very Spanish movies we've seen.
This was, for a lot of people, the first Spanish movie that they saw and knew that it was Spanish. As opposed to later on when they came back and they're like, oh, did you know that Del Toro also did this, and this character was meant to be this? Like, yes, Barbara, we know.
I didn't realize he did Hellboy for a long time.
Yeah, but I think for a lot of people, this was the first one that was unapologetically Mexican Spanish.
Yeah, exactly. And from this moment, we get guided to the entrance of the well, where there is a stone inside with, as the fawn is awoken, or Pan, I'll refer to them back and forth. But one, I have some stupid questions about this scene.
Yes. I have potentially stupid answers.
So, the fairies.
Ah, yes.
How do they already have the new shape?
Good question.
It is a very good question, because if these things have been waiting around for so long, you would maybe assume that they want it, because the other fairy, and this is one thing where it's a little bit of detail that kind of leads more to it being all in her head. Again, same with the magical thought. You shape your own reality. But it leads to the fact that she already's changed the bug to the fairies, so therefore everything after that is going to be what she's seeing it, or how she's interpreting and reimagining.
I like your analytics. I would argue that per the movie's own debate, she already knows what fairies are supposed to look like, so they're just their own selves.
But they showed up as bug. The first one showed up as a bug.
Because it felt like it.
I will say it didn't feel like being a bug.
I don't know. It's a pixie fairy.
Yeah.
They do what they want.
We have no clue. There's nothing explained in this, and this is our American my very much American over analytical bullshit.
But I would argue that because I have too much free time, and the study of fanciful creatures is one of the many hobbies that I partake in unnecessarily heavily, having fairies mimic nature, especially around quote-unquote non-peer adults, is pretty standard practice throughout most fairy lore.
Yeah.
Some fairies are flowers, some fairies are sticks, some fairies are stick bugs, apparently now.
Yeah, or there's spirits of certain objects and stuff and whatnot, depending on whatever lore you're going into.
Exactly. So, like, having fairies recognize her, having the word spread, having everyone then be fairy, not a huge red flag / plot hole for me.
Yeah. It's just one of my stupid questions, because honestly, I'm not even questioning there being a giant fawn at the bottom of this well.
Of course there's a giant fawn at the bottom of the well. Look at it. I would be upset if there wasn't.
And here's how you know this well is super ancient.
Yes.
There are no handrails.
I wouldn't even say super ancient. In the last 20 years.
Yeah. Well, no, because even if you go into castles, there's oftentimes, like, carved into the stone, like some railing of some kind.
True.
There's not even that in this. It feels...
Do fantasy creatures need handrails? I've made this debate many a times with our friend Crystal on whether or not fantasy characters need handrails, because the amount of lack of handrails in Lord of the Rings just drives me up the wall.
Yeah, well...
The dwarves need handrails. This would save a lot of trouble.
Back in them old days, the disabled were killed before.
That I do not doubt.
Yeah, this is how I'm. It's a dark humor. I'm sorry. It's the reality of how stuff was back then.
You're not wrong. I was specifically focusing on the magical creatures, who I haven't yet gotten to whether or not they have wheelchair-bound fawns or not.
Humans are rather magical creatures in themselves.
I would like to think so.
we are to a point.
I think we're closer to like the trolls than like the elves, but you know, we're in there.
You're closer to the goblins.
Oh, for sure, 100%.
Yeah, I would say I'm more of a dwarf.
Oh, that's sweet.
Except I don't have the facial hair. I'm more realistically probably a hobbit.
It's okay, Keely. You can be a beardless dwarf all you want.
Oh yeah. But I do like the fawn in this.
I do too. His design is spectacular.
He feels so ancient, but he is also kind of sassy and a bit rude.
He is. And I like that we purposefully play with the idea of what a fawn is from the get-go. Because we use the word pan in the English version, we use the word fawn in the Spanish version, specifically so that way the confusion exists. Mm-hmm. Del Toro assumed that most of the American English speakers would know what Pan kind of was. You kind of remember him as a fawn from that Shakespeare thing, but you don't remember him.
Or we'd remember it from our Greek class or Greek mythology classes in like middle school. Because if we said fawn, American would have automatically gone to fucking Bambi.
Oh, for sure. Whereas with the Spanish-speaking group, they already had a more base of what a fawn is there, but if he had said Pan, they would have thought the god Pan.
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
So by crossing that, and then on top of that, fucking with everybody by making him have a deer head made out of wood and moss, perfect. I love it. This is the way to mess with mythology. He's
also very, like, his eyes are, well, later on, because right now his eyes are very milky.
Yes.
But he gets very goat-like as well.
He does get very goat-like, which is a different creature again altogether. This is a really great play on Roman versus Greek versus modern versus none of the above versus some Celtic thrown in there for good measure. Like, this is a great melting pot of, like, mythology.
fighting Phil from Hercules idea.
Yes.
Because that's the only thing I think most of us would think of is...
Oh, for sure. And he knew that.
Yeah.
He knew that going in, and that's why this fawn is uniquely itself, but not out of place at all.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't create a new creature. He just changed what you thought it was going to be.
Yeah. And in this moment, too, we are also told that Ophelia is told that she is the princess of legend of this kingdom, and that there used to be hundreds of portals of the king trying to find her, but this is the last portal left.
What a lucky lass.
And that she must complete 3 tasks before the full moon. Very much womanhood.
If you want to go there, I read this very heavy-handed as the trope of 3, which is super hard-hitting in mythology and fairy tale world.
I'm more so like, the 3 I'm talking, all of that. I'm talking about the moon is very much so the female symbol.
It is also so hard-hitting into the mythology world that, like, if the fawn had the next sentence came out of his mouth is, if you don't, the werewolf will eat you, I would have been like, yes, it will.
Yeah.
Of course it will. I have no doubts. And it will be a weird, beautiful wooden werewolf.
Well, and on my stupid side of the brain, I'm going back to last podcast on the left. I know I'm going to butcher this word. The moon is her first menarche.
Uh-huh.
I know. I don't think that's the way that word's pronounced, but that's how it's stuck in my head. Her first period.
Yes.
Yeah.
I see the resemblance. I raise you random male in the 18th century who made up this nonsense.
Oh no, I know it's nonsense, but it's still like
it's so much nonsense that only other dudes know about this nonsense, and women are over here being like, "I'm sorry, we're supposed to be what?"
Yeah, no, it's hard. It's the stupid idea of that being the time of the month. The women around the world are saints.
Yes, yeah, no, that's a lie. There's no such thing.
I know. I'm just playing on some stupid bullshit. Because Ophelia from here is given the Book of Crossroads.
Yes, which again, is this book mentioned in other mythology? Kind of, but not like this. And I love that. It's his own fantasy, but it fits.
Yeah, exactly.
None of it feels like, oh, you made up your own OC. That's cute.
Mm-hmm. Well, and yeah, that's the exact thing with it. Like, it ties into so many things that we know and that we're familiar with, but blends them in a new, original way. Mm-hmm. Because speaking of blending, we finally get the worlds are finally actually crossed.
Yes. We're
given that information that, hey, this is all one world. And our palettes begin to start blending little bits here and there, but yeah, it's this interesting cross section now.
Yes,
because we cut from here in the morning to the colonel shining his shoes, polishing his boots,
because he's a boring ass man with nothing better to do.
And and this is where I was going to call himself. He may be a colonel, but he is a General Dick.
He is General Dick.
Yes, General Dick.
He is General Waffle Dick.
The fuck is a waffle dick?
It is worse than a dick. It's when you have a dick that also has divots in it.
I mean,
nobody wants this.
Ribbed.
Nope, not ribbed. Not ribbed for her pleasure. Waffled.
Waffled for her disappointment.
Waffled for your disappointment, yes. Waffled for general disappointment.
For him, too.
Yeah.
And so from here, Ophelia opens the book, and it tells her that she needs to, what she needs to do, she's got to deliver some stones to a frog.
Yes.
All these trials start off very childish.
They do, and they also start off very, like, simple.
Mm-hmm.
Just go get the thing from the place.
Yeah.
Talk to the one dude. And, like, those who know old fairy tales are like, you're into some fuckery.
I've played many a RPG. I know where this is going.
This one little side quest is going to take me days.
This delivering the mail is going to lead me to fight God.
Yeah, actually. Yeah. Fact.
And so also at this time she's kind of interrupted because she's given the address to make her look like a princess for her mother.
Yes, because, nothing makes your mom feel better than you looking shipshape.
Yeah. I look like a general bum most of the time.
Me too.
So, yeah.
I mean, don't get me wrong. My mother, tried very hard. I appreciate it. I have many good pictures, Mom, but I am, in fact, a raccoon.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we've established you're a raccoon and I'm a possum.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah. And there are a couple things in the scene, too. One, the dress is a nod to Del Toro's, which I completely forgot this was his first movie, Kronos.
Yes.
Where there's a small part about a woman not liking the green dress not fitting as well as it used to.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also a part that shows Ophelia in a way as being almost an accessory to her mother a little bit. But
she is now. If she wasn't before, she is now. But
at the same time, it's contrasting the Colonels because it's a more endearing accessory of like.
This is him telling her, like, if you want to live,
mm-hmm.
you need to be cute, quiet, and like a mirror of your mother.
Yeah.
Who is cute and quiet.
Yeah. Obey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is not Ophelia.
No. And it gets a little bit into it later. There's another little bit of scene. But this is also like the first time we really have the blending because this is the first bit of architecture where the windows are round.
Yes. Very cute.
It's a very warm bathtub scene.
It's almost pleasant, but it's like the entire undertone of the scene is uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Like it is a bunch of people trying to be nice and sweet to each other and knowing that this is awkward.
Yeah, because she comes down from her dress and all the servants are like, oh, you're so beautiful. But
knowing full damn well that this child would rather be playing with a bug.
Here's what it is. It's very much about the parents or the adults trying to hide the cruelty of the situation from Ophelia.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Yeah, because Ophelia begins to open up to Mercedes, and she's also the only one who's really connecting with her because she's actually talking to her and having somewhat of a conversation.
You might argue that Mercedes is the only one with the balls to talk to Ophelia.
Yeah, and to be fair, it's not like some of the other movies where we've said, oh, you're just being a bad mother, like in A Christmas Prince.
Christmas Prince mother.
To defend Carmen,
she doesn't have an option.
She's busy being pregnant.
And terribly sick.
Yeah.
Like, she was probably terribly ill before they got here, trying real hard to hide that nonsense. And then, on top of all that, there is no way that this woman married this man without knowing what level of horrible she was getting into. She got into it because she knew if she married him, he wouldn't kill her.
Yeah, and Del Toro also mentions that it's heavily hinted that the Colonel was responsible for Ophelia's dad to go missing.
Yeah, he's definitely the murderer.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's always the stepdad, right?
I don't know. I haven't seen a lot of movies with stepdads. Unless it's like a feel-good Hallmark movie.
True, feel-good Hallmark movies, it's never the stepdad. You should love him. He's poor and misunderstood.
Yeah.
And eats a lot of pizza.
Yeah, he's the cool dad.
And by cool dad, we mean sad bachelor who doesn't have children.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, cool dad.
But in this moment, too, like, I do like Mercedes.
I do, too.
She's probably my favorite character in this movie. Because, like, when I watched it, I'm like, oh, this movie's fucking dope. But, like, as I've gotten older, it's very much Mercedes is, like, the most interesting character of the group.
Definitely.
Because she is sweet, but this is where she's really trying to, like, hide everything from Ophelia. She's very skirting around the issues with her, where she's like, Ophelia's like, I saw a fairy and I did this and this. And she's like, do you believe in fairies? And she's like, I used to believe in a lot of things. And it's not even like, she's not even dismissing like, oh, fairies aren't real. She's like, I used to believe.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like Mercedes.
I do too. I think she adds a nice level of complexity, and she doesn't make the rest of the adults in this film feel like the dismissive, like, poo-poo, childish thoughts.
Yeah.
It very much feels like, no, we're a little busy right now. We don't have time for fairy nonsense, not because they're not real, but because we are busy with all of the murdering your stepfather is doing.
Yeah. Well, and on top of that, she's kind of a counterpart to Ophelia, where she's idealistically kind of what Ophelia could become.
Exactly.
Yeah. Strong, independent.
Independent, but somehow still obedient.
Not even really. She's following what she believes.
Definitely. But and we'll go into this more as the trials happen, but Ophelia is brazenly herself the entire time, whereas Mercedes has to hide it.
Yeah, and to a point too, because one of our first introductions to her is in this opening scene of where she's cutting vegetables. She tucks the knife into her apron.
She steals the knife. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't even say steal. She just has it on her at all times in case she's constantly guarded.
She is forever ready and forever knowing that she cannot be who she is.
Yeah.
But there's also no hiding that she's Mercedes.
Yeah.
But
exactly.
she's not as, like, brazen as Ophelia is. Ophelia is polite, is sweet, like, that's part of who she is.
Mm-hmm.
But she is not going along with any of this. Even though she already knows that her stepfather's a terrible person. She doesn't know how bad, but she knows he's not nice.
Yeah.
I have no doubt her mother the entire way up there was like, all right, here's what you gotta do.
Gotta do it to survive.
Exactly.
Yeah. Because from here we cut to the Colonel seeing smoke on a hill, and Ophelia ventures into the woods for the first trial to a dead fig tree, which is I like this bit because there's quite a bit to it. One, figs are considered like one of the very first like fruits, like very first symbols of humanity and like cultivation and shit.
Yeah, because figs are fucking delicious.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah, you can dry those shits, and you get candy.
Micah's wedding, no one wanted to eat the figs. There was dried figs on like the dessert cakes.
They're so good.
It was so good.
They're
also,
so good.
As he puts it, this is a very bougie wedding that they had.
I understand.
It was at the Kimball in Dallas.
Yes, I know.
Not the Louis Kahn building, the one next to it.
I know.
Yeah,
I know exactly which one.
Renzo Piano.
I have been there.
Yeah,
I know exactly which building. We went on a trip just to see that fucker.
Sorry, that was the reception. Yeah, you know exactly where that reception was at.
I do. Well, yes, that's very fancy.
He wanted it in the Louis Kahn building, but there was a Monet exhibit that they had to close down early for.
Oh, the problem of bougie people.
Oh, it was fun. It was a good time.
Of course it was fun. It was amazing.
I mean, he's kind of mythical in himself. I refer to him as my aunt.
Yes. I mean, you gotta have one that matches yourself.
He's 6'8".
Even if it is in a stupidly architectural building.
You should have seen the look on his face the first time I called him an ant.
Aha.
He is not a fantasy fan. And he's like, what the fuck did you just call me, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But enough of that tangent. The fig tree is very important because also the fig is shaped like the fawn.
It is. And
vaguely.
Also figs, way back in the day, back when everything was considered an aphrodisiac, but it's stuck around a little bit more as like a symbol of passion. Not as hardcore as like pomegranate or like any of those, but at one point it was considered. Yeah.
Well, and on top of that, it also is very female reproductive organ-like.
Yes, not as papaya-esque as nowadays, but in the same vine.
I just realized Ophelia crawls down the tree vagina.
She does crawl into the tree vagina. Or the tree asshole, whatever you're into.
For the themes of the movie, it is definitely the tree vagina.
Probably. Knowing Del Toro.
And also while she enters, there's like this little bit of magical pollen that we did see originally in the beginning. And Del Toro points out that there are points where the two worlds touch, and that's the only time we see this effect. It's
wonderful. A very good effect.
Yeah, because from here, the Colonel finds the fire. They are gone. And there's ampules of antibiotics left behind.
How dare they leave just medicine laying around?
Oh, that's we forgot to mention. Mercedes, when she reveals her secret, she's talking to the doctor, asking for medicine.
Yes.
Yeah, because someone's wounded and the leg's not doing so good.
Yeah. We don't want to really chop that shit off anymore.
Yeah, because from here we get a cool tree wipe.
Yes.
And Ophelia finds the frog and is a bit judgmental of the creature.
She's a little rude to this thing.
Yeah. Her encounter with the trials is very much similar to her encounters with the Colonel we've seen so far. Because the very first encounter, he's very judgmental of her. She, in turn, is judgmental of the fairy tale trials.
She is. And I also think that she treats the fairy tale trials almost exactly the same way that she treats the encounters with the Colonel.
Yeah. And same with the Colonel to her.
Oh, yeah. They are both similar souls, just one's a psychopath and one's a little girl.
Yeah, exactly.
That's, really the only difference. I'm just kidding. There's a lot more differences.
Yeah, why don't you just put a dust brew mustache on Ophelia now?
No, can't. She's too nice. Like, she's one of those kids who would blatantly tell you look fat in an outfit, but, like, also you wanted to know. Like, she's that kid.
My baby brother has done that without my mom asking.
Oh, same. Same.
And so there are a couple things of note with this scene as well. It's not mentioned in the commentary, but the tree is dying, and this is in like the little story tale. There's like some little story tale books that are before this that give a little bit of context, very little context. But the frog is the reason the tree is dying isn't because the frog's eating bugs, as the translation says, but he's also eating the amber of the tree.
Yes, he is literally sucking the life out of the tree.
Yeah, but also this scene was supposed to be a battle scene between her and the toad, and it was supposed to be in the hollow underneath the tree, which was again supposed to be very womb-like.
Yes.
But when the animatronic was delivered, it couldn't move around, and it was too heavy, and so they decided to make it more static. And this scene was actually shot in what was supposed to be a transitional scene of her crawling into the hollow. Which
I think actually works better, because
exactly.
If it had been that, I think you would have gotten too much of the frog. This way the frog feels very gigantic and like almost impossible, but without being like, oh, that's the wrong scale. Like he feels fairy tale large frog-esque, and if you'd been able to like see all of him, you could have. It's easier to make giant things smaller when they're all visible. Godzilla's a good example. Now that we all know what Godzilla fully looks like, he's had to get bigger and bigger and bigger to continue to be gigantic.
It's like there was some YouTube video I was watching a long time ago where it's like the Dragon Ball Z issue, or like the Shonen manga issue, where like, oh, we finished this trial. Well, we gotta step up our game. We gotta bring up, oh, Frieza's dead. Well,
you gotta have something worse.
Yeah, exactly. Or Piccolo to Frieza, but yeah.
And we've just eliminated that problem from the get-go.
Yeah, and what I like about this is that the trials really start. Why I like that this didn't work out is that it's the less dynamic of the trials.
Yes.
But it also feels rather childlike considering the rest of them.
Yes. And on top of that, this is probably the least rememberable trial. But that helps. Yeah. Because even though it's just the, like, quote-unquote rule of three, there's a lot to take in with this movie. And so having one trial be kind of like just go talk to the frog, really helps balance out how much we're about to do. And in another way, it also... It's kind of like... Ophelia's kind of been nice to the baby inside the womb. Yeah, I mean, she's not been terribly mean. She's not excited. But yeah, exactly. It's starting... as the trials progress, she also starts to open up about the baby, because as the frog was supposed to, the battle was supposed to take place in kind of a womb, she's very judgmental at the beginning. Yeah, I mean, big sister problems stacked on top of fascist war problems. Yeah, exactly. And so from here back outside, it's cold. There's rain. The dress is all muddied. She has, for the time period, ruined this dress. There's no getting these stains out. There's no OxyClean. This dress is forever going to have brown bits on it. Interesting. I mean, think about it. The cleaning products of the time would have been lye soap and maybe some bleach. Even in the 40s? Where they're at? Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean in the countryside, but like if... OxyClean was definitely not around. Washing machines still were like the crazy big drum ones, and then you put your stuff through a wringer. Things I don't think about. Yeah. I mean, like, dry cleaning wasn't really an option at this point. I've never actually done dry cleaning. If you have very expensive fabrics, it is recommended. Especially because these people are paid to remove stains, and they can do it much better than you can. Okay. But that's not an option. A, they're in the middle of the mountains, where, like, getting medicine is already a problem. And, like, it's also a little bit implied that the cabin they're staying at is, like, it's an old cabin. Like, even if we are talking, like, the most modern technology of the 1940s, this cabin's not got it. This cabin barely has lights. Yeah, now that I think about it, I don't know what era I was even thinking, because, I mean, we didn't have a lot of household appliances at this time. Okay. This was the start of the big boom of appliances, but this is back when, like, the idea of a, like, bathtub toaster would have been seen as a good idea. This is back when cars were detached, or garages were detached from the house. Yes. Yeah. Okay.
recentering how my stupid brain works.
It's okay.
And so, dressed ruined, we get the guests start to arrive, and we get this dinner scene where they're discussing rationing while they're having basically a feast themselves.
Yeah, rude.
Where the Colonel definitely has this mentality that they are better than everyone.
Oh yeah, this really is solidifying it too.
And it starts really putting this movie in this weird. It's 100% a war movie with little bits of childish fantasy in between.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah. And we also get more so of the relationship between the Colonel and Carmen, where it definitely feels more of survival, as she's the romantic, because they're like, oh, one of the wives is, how did you meet? She goes through it, and the Colonel's like, no one gives a shit about that. He's being General Dick again, where he's like,
yes,
no, don't give a shit. But
it very much feels like it is fully Carmen's responsibility to make him look good, and he expects that of her. Like the entire party. He's like, I'm going to do what I want, and it's your job to make other people think I'm an okay person.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. And because even then, like, amongst his peers, they're like, oh yeah, your dad died smashing the watch at this battle so his son would know when he died. And we know that he denies that he has the watch, but he's fixed the watch.
Yes, exactly.
Because he's a dick.
Yes, he is.
Also of note, the architecture and design of this scene is very angular and very plain, but it's also mimicking of the Pale Man scene that's to come. It's kind of toned down, which the Pale Man scene is much more elaborate. And I just realized this too. All the trials are having to deal are 100% reflections of her life. Mm-hmm. As I said with the Toad, it's the baby. The Pale Man is the Colonel.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Like I said, there's a lot to this movie that if you really want to go down, so much interpretation, symbolism, it's fantastic.
Yes.
Because from here, Ophelia returns, but is sent to bed without supper.
Yes, and her and like the other servants would probably have already been on full rationed foods, and they were probably already cut rations so that we could have this fancy-ass feast.
Oh, yeah.
So, like, she going to bed real hungry.
Yeah, because... and that's a good note, too, because at the start of the party, Carmen's very worried where Ophelia's at, and the Colonel's like, calm down. I'm sure she's fine.
He doesn't care.
The guests are here.
Yeah, he does not give one shit where Ophelia is.
Oh, not at all.
In fact, if she didn't show up, he'd probably be happy.
Oh, yeah. And she doesn't show up.
Yeah.
But Carmen ruins it with her happy talk.
Yes.
Yeah.
How dare she be happy?
But at this time when Ophelia is getting her bath, there is good writing here, because despite technically being punished, there's this moment where her mom is very caring and
like at one point her mom was probably a really great mom to her, but her mom has had to switch all of her focus.
Exactly. Yeah. And is very much she sees herself in Ophelia in this moment.
Definitely.
Yeah. And from this, the fairy returns and brings Ophelia back to the labyrinth, where she hands the key to the fawn. And there's a lot of parallels. There's keys later on between Carmen and her brother, and
these keys everywhere.
A lot of stuff everywhere. But at this point, we also get a better look at the stone this time around. And the stone is of the fawn overlooking Ophelia and a baby.
Yes, it is. The prophecy.
But there's some little bit more to it. So, one, we start to see the fawn is slowly being restored and creepier. He looks half decayed.
He's getting better.
He's eating some meat.
No one said the fawn ate plants.
No, not at all. But he's always coming from the shadows.
He is, in fact, a creepy man.
Oh, yeah. And also the fairies are eating the meat, too, where he's kind of like playing with them a little bit. Which
makes more like mythological sense, especially if like these are pixie-style fairies.
Yeah.
Even some normal fairies, depending on where you are. Fawns eating people meat is kind of a new one, but again, we've kind of created our own mythological character here.
Well, and some fawns are destructive depending on which interpretation of them, and that's something Del Toro wanted to show is that the fawn initially is kind of creepy, but then this is the first time we see him actually eating.
Yes.
/ there's some ties into it too, because Ophelia knows everyone else has eaten. The fawn's actively eating something in front of her. Might not be appetizing. The next trial involves food.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, it all plays very nicely.
Yes. And also, the statue, while being prophetic of like the what's to come, the baby in it has horns.
Yes, it does.
Which hints at the final test, but there's also some other stuff in it too that kind of makes me question the ending a little bit.
I like to imagine it's because the baby is Captain Dick Waffle's son.
No, that was my immediate thought too, but there's something with the king later that
for sure.
Makes me question some stuff. And again, there's no answer to it, really.
No, it's whatever you want it to be.
Yeah. And that's what makes this movie great.
Yes.
And in the morning, food is now being rationed, and Ophelia reads the book, but it becomes very sinister as the ink blots look very much like blood and feminine reproductive organs.
Oh no.
Yeah.
How creepy.
Her magical thoughts are manifesting in the real world. Because there's a couple of things here too, where the fascists are spreading propaganda, or spreading their own fantasy.
Of course.
Through the food, through the propaganda wrapped bread.
I love propaganda.
Oh, I do too. It's
so fascinating.
I'm very close to buying some books on some Russian propaganda posters and stuff.
There's just so much to learn. So much psychology.
Oh yeah. And in this moment too, the doc goes to help the rat. Well, one also Carmen starts to have a miscarriage.
Yeah, or just more illness, depending on who you're interpreting from.
More serious illness.
Very serious.
Because the doc
baby death serious.
Yeah, because the doc goes to help her, and he's like, "Take this medicine, and she'll be fine," kind of thing. But at the same time, now he's going to go help the rebels as the fawn returns, and this is the first time we see anything besides the one fairy outside of the labyrinth or something underground. And that's everything in the story happens underground.
It does.
The toad and what's to come.
Well, I mean, which makes sense because this isn't fantasy versus real world. This is underground versus real world. They repetitively call the fantasy world the underground.
Yeah. Yeah. And very much in a way rebelling in a fantasy way.
Yes.
But the fawn is there to deliver a message, and he's like, "Hey, why aren't you doing your shit? The moon's gonna be here soon.
Come on, get on this. Snap, snap."
But he also, that's your mom being sick, no excuse. Here, take this mandrake, cure your mom, and here's some other fairies. This next trial is gonna be really dangerous. This is also cut with the doctor amputating a leg to bring us back to reality where...
the joys of amputation.
Well, and also this too, where we see the start of the act, but we don't see the finish of it.
You know what's happening without any questions, but you also aren't privy to the potentially bad CGI in years to come.
Yeah, and from this, speaking of CGI, the book itself is beautiful in what it does. Because Ophelia opens the book, and the pale man in the book has antlers of his own, and is kind of in front of its own gateway too. Like there's a. I wish I had spent some time and actually really look through the artwork, because it's impressive. Because one thing I did notice is even the upcoming wrong key is marked in the book as the right key.
Yes.
So it's like paint by numbers or follow what you believe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and so Ophelia decides to go down into the trial. She uses chalk to open up a door in a wall.
I freaking love magic chalk in movies and books. It's one of my favorite magic tropes, and this is one of my favorite uses of magic chalk.
You remember Chalk Zone?
I watched the shit out of Chalk Zone.
I vaguely remember that show.
I love Chalk Zone, not for its humor, not for its characters, but solely for the concept. And that was when I realized that I was not a normal child.
Yeah, the only thing I really remember from it was the Biclops.
Yeah, that's fair.
Because he had 2 eyeballs and stacked. But from this point, we do have this transition from harsh architecture to a very semi-organic, very gothic architecture of the Pale Man's realm. Which, interesting stuff on the table.
Mm-hmm.
There's Jell-O.
I love Jell-O. 1940s, man. Jell-O would have been a huge thing.
Well, a fun food fact, because I'm a food nerd.
I love food.
Jell-O was invented in 1897, and aspic has been around since the 1300s.
Of course it has. We love a jiggly substance.
Mm.
And waste not, want not. We're gonna boil it all.
We do like things that jiggle.
We do like things that jiggle.
Yeah. But also another one of my stupid questions. What if she ate his eyes?
That would have ruined one of the themes that Del Toro talks about later with how the Pale Man is supposed to have some connection to his Catholic background.
Mm-hmm.
So that would have been problematic.
Yeah. It's still a stupid, fun idea, because, I mean,
or
yeah,
even
eyes
just taking him and, like, throwing him across the room so he has to go find him before he can get her.
Toss him in the fire.
Yeah, just kind of whoops.
Or feed the fairies. I'm sure the fairies would eat them.
Probably.
They ate questionable fawn meat.
They did, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like there was other solutions, but again, she's a 10-year-old child.
Yeah. Well, and going back to your religious mention that Del Toro does have a lot of references to it, the Pale Man's entire lore is told on the ceilings.
Yes.
And it's not fully told, but it gives you enough intention that he eats children.
To the point where he ignores the feast in front of him.
Yeah. Or he's cursed that he can't eat it.
It depends on how you're reading it.
From his lore, he is cursed to not eat the feast in front of him. That's his punishment.
Yes.
He's basically in this world's purgatory / hell.
Yes.
And there's some nice little nods too to the well, not nice. There's interesting nods to the Holocaust, because there's the pile of children's shoes that this isn't the first child who's wandered into his realm.
And also kind of makes reference that maybe like each big war, or each like, I shouldn't say big war, each war has had these trials before. Yeah,
and there's always the victims as children, and Ophelia is maybe not the first incarnation of the princess.
Exactly.
But of also note as well, there's the pile of shoes is his nod to the Holocaust, but behind it as well, the fire and the fire grate, very teeth-like.
Very teethy.
And sits right behind the pile of shoes.
Very teethy.
Yeah, very, very good. There's so much detail.
It is delightfully detailed.
And all the doors, despite looking old, the most ancient, decrepit-looking one is the one that actually holds the dagger.
Yes, of course.
And so, fun bit of design trivia. The Pale Man actually originally had a face. But when they put it on, they said he just looked like a fat dude who had lost a bunch of weight. So they removed it. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, no. I would argue that the Pale Man is one of Del Toro's most recognizable creations, and then to have Doug bring him to life.
Yeah.
Like, I know other people know them both from other stuff, and they're probably more recognized for other stuff, but when you, like, everyone has seen this character. Everyone, even without having seen the movie, goes, nope, fuck that shit right off.
Yeah.
Without even knowing, like, that he's a child eater.
Oh, yeah. No, he is creepy as shit, because
it is delightfully good horror without being, like, gory horror.
Yeah, because here's what happens next. Ophelia fucks up, she eats 2 grapes.
I mean, girl is starving to death.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's the thing.
The fact she only ate 2 grapes is impressive.
Yeah.
Would have had a handful of bread.
There's mystery meat as well. And definitely more appealing to a child.
Yes. And it's also interesting because, so Del Toro turned down doing The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe for this movie. Something that he has gone back and said, like, I don't regret. I love those movies. I love those stories. I am glad I made Pan's Labyrinth. I don't regret missing out on that. And I think the version that came out was great. But there are some strong parallels between the storylines, not necessarily of the first one, but especially of the second one.
Okay.
And the trials. Mostly because A, mythology, B, fairy tale, and C, like, as Del Toro says, once a Catholic, always a Catholic. Yeah. And so, like, because of that meshing, there's, like, some really great overlaps that you could infer. Okay. And, like, in one of the Narnia tales, the characters are given mystery meat. And they're like, this is fantastic mystery meat. Turns out to be, I think it's either unicorn or baby unicorn meat, which is the equivalent of eating like a human baby.
And we know if you drink unicorn blood, you live a longer life, but it is a cursed life.
That's a different lore. But like, it's the same sort of like, be wary of what you eat at the table of the devil sort of like mindset. Okay. And so like, it's a really nice crossover that she ate something that she knew, something she thought was innocent, and she managed to only eat 2 of them.
Well,
which happens to be the same number of fairies she has.
She has 3 fairies.
Oh, she does have 3 fairies. That's right.
But it's the same number of eyes the pale man has.
It is.
Which is kind of what's the there's that Greek legend too of the creature that's got 1,000 eyes.
Yes.
But it's kind of a play on. I feel it's a little bit of a play on that. But because what happens next is very Silent Hill like.
Oh, I love it.
The first real danger of this movie happens because the pale man grabs the eyes, sticks them in the palm of his hands, or sticks them into what Del Toro refers to as his stigmata.
Yes.
Back to his Catholic upbringing. And uses his hands as his face.
And does he put them in hand position? No, he puts them on his face like a mask, which is the creepiest way to do that.
Oh, yeah.
It's so freaking good.
Oh, and it's great, too, because, like, while he's chasing after her, he's not even, like, really looking. He just kind of has this general direction of holding his eyes up and then screaming.
And it's very much... It's got that level of chaos and unknown without being, like, okay, we've broken our own fantasy rules level of, like, crazy and unknown. Like, this guy very much feels like, okay, other stuff in this world, the frog, probably equally as dangerous, you just got lucky.
Yeah.
And now you're not lucky anymore.
Yeah, well, and on top of that, like, here's why I think Del Toro not having the frog work the way he wanted to works better.
Yeah.
Because if we're referring these two back to the, back to her real life, the baby's really not a threat.
No.
It's the stepfather that's the threat. And
she's recognized that now.
And it's very much so
a life or death threat.
Life or death, and the Holocaust references are reflective of the fascism in Germany and
at this time that was coming over.
It had one in Spain. This is after the Civil War.
Yes.
Here's a little bit of history because I've watched a few videos on this. This is after the Civil War. The fascists have won.
But now they are hunting down everyone else.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Anyone who doesn't believe the same way they do.
Exactly. And so this is like the terrible idea of like they have won and it's not just they are happy and content with winning.
No, they want more.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
They want total domination.
I love the Pale Man. He's one of my favorites. And also it's the part where he's eating the fairies.
Yes.
Is a reference to Francisco Goya's Saturn eating his children.
Yes. Also, did you know how they got the blood effects? Because that was a special effect. That wasn't CGI.
I saw how they did it. I can't remember. If I remember, he had like blood packs in his hand or something.
They were condoms filled with blood that he had to bite. It worked. It was very convincing.
They do make flavored condoms. I do not know how they taste.
I don't know what flavor you would mix with fairy blood to make it taste good.
Banana?
Strawberry? I feel like your fruit options are limited when it comes to condoms.
I have no clue.
I will say from experience, your fruit flavors are limited.
Do they even make fruit flavored condoms anymore?
Yeah, oh yeah. They also make chocolate, which you would hate.
That sounds awful. Yeah. I think chocolate's the most foul thing. There's something Del Toro thinks is the most foul thing. Is one of my favorite commentaries. I'll bring it up in a bit.
Okay.
But yeah, so the Pale Man scene is really cool.
It is one of the best scenes.
But this is the point where in the commentary, while Del Toro talked about that, it's not necessarily about passing the trial. It's about sticking to who you are.
Yes. And this is why him having his own reasoning and logic and correct answer for this supposedly open-ended story works so well for me. Because his logic isn't like, oh, you kind of filled that in. This feels a little like... No, this feels perfect and like it pieces together everything nicely. Where like, Ophelia is the disobedience.
Yeah.
She is the rebellion, but not to just, like, rebel against fascism. She is just never going to change who she is.
Yeah, she's the open rebellion within the house, and that's what bothers General Dick.
And the Pan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so Ophelia does escape the trial, very cleverly, too. But we cut to Mercedes giving her brother the key to the storehouse in town. And we get Ophelia puts the mandrake in the milk and puts it under her mother's bed.
You know, she's doing her best. She clearly still loves her mom, which I like this little bit because, like, there's not a lot that we get from Carmen the mom, but because Ophelia tries so hard to help her mom, that really helps solidify way later on in this movie. Exactly. If she makes it feel like her mom isn't just, like, an empty character.
Yeah. Well, and it's also used as a point to, like, show that she is physically weak.
Yeah, like, she's not in this story because she can't be.
No. And it also re-emphasizes that the Colonel is only cares about the kid. He doesn't care if she lives.
Exactly.
He's only cared about his legacy.
His son.
Yeah. And during this time, after this point, the rebels attack.
Surprise.
Fun fact, they couldn't use real explosions because there was a major drought in the area and they had to use fake plants.
They couldn't even have blanks in the guns. Like, they had to put all of this in afterwards.
Which Del Toro, because of that increase in budget, had to give up his producer and, I think, writer paychecks.
Yep. Like, he gave up his own salary to do this, and he's come out multiple times afterwards and says, no, I would do it again. Totally worth it. Yeah, because if I remember right, he also almost didn't make the movie because he was going to put up so much of his movie up front, and his producer buddy's like, don't do all that. I'll put half of it with you. Yeah. And so Pan's Labyrinth almost didn't get made. Well, and part of that was because he refused to use what he called big American money to do it because he was really afraid that the influence would have on the movie. He's like, no, this is going to be my way. It's going to be done here. I want these people. I don't want big Hollywood names. Yeah. And I think maybe part of that was maybe the influence of Hellboy. I think it definitely was because I know, especially the second one, which we'll eventually talk about, I have no doubt in my mind. But after the first one, he didn't get to see his full vision put into place. Okay. There was parts that were there that were what he wanted, and then there were parts that later on he's gone back and talked about how, like, because of so-and-so or because of these reasons, we had to do this, and I didn't get to follow the script, and that's why Hellboy doesn't read quite like a Del Toro movie that you're used to. Okay. Is partially because he had to use big Hollywood money and thus their influence. Okay. Well, it's also of note that Del Toro is very anti-establishment. Yes, he is. He would, if it was up to him, fund all of this himself all the time. Yeah, and I like how he puts it, that even he's very self-aware that he leans, as he says, a little bit too far left. Yeah. Yeah. It's a very nice touch of being self-aware but still being true to yourself. Yes. Like Ophelia. Yeah, exactly. And he's even reflected back as, like, most of his villains in his early works are fascists, or they're really bad people. Or they're symbols of industry, like in Kronos. But also, a little bit of note, speaking of Del Toro's earlier works, two of the rebels in the scene that the Colonel fucks around with, and this is the part where, like, okay, yeah, he's a bad man, he bashes that dude's face in. It's in this scene, the way he plays with the dying man, where the man who can't speak and he's just putting the gun in his face and letting him weakly try and bat it away. Yeah. It's very much like watching my dipshits play with their mice. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it is no longer just like, wow, you have some anger issues. It's, wow, you're fucking messed up. Yeah. But the two rebels found are two of the orphans from Devil's Backbone. It's all connected. Yeah, it is. There's a lot of, like, little stuff like that. But also what's interesting about this scene too is, as cruel as the Colonel is, and I'm not going to chalk it up to them following orders.
the way the other men kill the rebels is very kind in comparison.
Yes.
They're just pulling up, oh, this man's gonna die, put them out of their misery.
And if he wasn't in the movie, they would all look like crazy
Mm-hmm.
murderers. But because he is here,
yeah.
they no longer even hold a torch to the level of like pure horror that this man holds.
Yeah, he's the one that takes it a little bit too far. It's
I wouldn't even say a little bit.
Way too far.
Way too far. These guys, I think originally, part of the reason they're here with
Mm-hmm.
him is because other people around them saw them and went, you take it too far. Time to send you off with the other man who takes it way too fucking far.
Yeah, exactly.
Y'all can be crazy together.
Yep. And so from here, we cut back to Ophelia now promising to protect the baby and take her to her kingdom.
Which is sweet. I mean, it is proof that, like, she isn't stuck in her ways. Like, there's room for growth and development.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also it's her maturing, realizing that despite this baby being the son of this horrible person, the baby's innocent.
The baby is innocent, and I also think this is the start of her really coming to terms with the fact that her mom might not make it.
Yeah. And so this will be the last thing of her mother for her. Because also at this point, we get back to the more mature themes where Doctor and Mercedes are getting a little bit more nervous as they did find a rebel alive, and the captain begins to torture them in a very unique and cruel way.
Yes.
Because this is the little... Here's where the little bits add up. We've seen him be really cruel. We've seen his brutality. But this is where we get the interpretation and the full rampage is never fully seen, because his torture is very psychological, as well as like, if you can count to 3 without stuttering, I'll let you go.
Knowing full damn well this man can't.
Yeah. And so like, we don't really get any further. We get about like the first swing, and then it cuts.
Yeah.
Fun bit. This is the first scene written for the movie, and he wrote it in 1993.
Dang.
The same year as Kronos.
Been planning a while.
Yeah, like I said, this movie took him like almost a decade to bring to fruition.
Yeah.
I think he said the movie almost destroyed him, like he lost like 40 pounds or something. And if you haven't seen Del Toro's actual physique, he is a very large man.
He's a round man.
He is, to the point, round and tall, or...
He is overall a husky large man.
Yeah, to the point where in Pacific Rim, he allowed the young Japanese actress to call him Totoro-san because she was afraid of him a little bit. But yeah, he's interesting. But from here, the fawn returns that night, and his cruelty ramps up as well. Very much like I said, the pan is very much in ways reflective of the Colonel. Because he's like, oh, wait, you disobeyed me. You ate the fruit. You've ruined it. You're human now. You'll die with the humans.
Yes. But at the same time, the way that the Colonel's rage and anger play out all feel solid, is, I guess, the best word I can think of. Whereas all of the Fawn's supposed anger, no matter, like, throughout the entire bit, feels fake.
Yeah.
At every moment where he's like, oh, you've ruined it. Oh, like, even though he is putting on a good play, and even though Ophelia definitely seems to believe it at the moment, every time I rewatch this, knowing how good an actor this man is, and knowing how good of a dubber they got for this, there is no doubt in my mind that this is like a performance.
It's a little bit it's very Shakespearean.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And it feels like the moment in the Shakespeare plays and the old fairy tales where you're supposed to be calling bluffs.
Yeah.
And up until this point, we haven't had to doubt anything. Ophelia hasn't had to doubt anything. She knows who everyone is, where everything is going. And she's just kind of been going along with this whole, like, yeah, you're probably the lost princess thing.
Yeah.
This is the first, like, time where she has to decide whether or not she's going to fight for that.
Oh, yeah. Exactly. And of note, we did bring up how great Jones is. This is specifically the scene where everyone was so impressed with him.
Yes.
Because an American doing Spanish in a very serious scene, blind, walking backwards and forwards in full prosthetics.
On stilts.
Yeah. He is impressive.
Is incredibly impressive. And again, he cannot hear any of Ophelia's lines because the ears and the eyes are going off the whole time.
Yeah. And he can barely see. Like, if I remember right, he's actually, like, seeing through, like, the nose holes.
That was for the Pale Man.
Pale Man,
So
okay.
he actually complimented the Fawn's costume as one of the most comfortable ones he's ever been put in.
Yeah, he didn't have any rashes, and they used a lot of talcum, but...
Well, part of that is because to get big, heavy legs to fit, most of the designs require them to be put on your back and then walked forward, kind of dinosaur-esque. These ones were actually attached to his hips, so he could actually, like, move. Yeah. And it was better weight distribution. And this was also one of the first times that they had time to really, like, get through the full design set for the prosthetics. So, like, this one, the Fawn's body is separated into two parts, so he can actually bend. Yeah. Which was, for those who aren't, like, squished into costumes a lot, is a huge deal. Yeah. Which meant he could sit down.
And there's more dynamic to it between, like, what we've seen from Suitmation with Godzilla and stuff, where it's not as rigid.
Exactly. And so, like, his only real complaint was the horns, which were 10 pounds. But they were the last thing to be put on. Yeah. And so, like, they talked about how, like, yeah, we put him on, and he was a really big trooper about, like, no, I'm fine, leave him on, don't mess anything up, we've got another shot to shoot here in just a minute. But, like, they could take them off him for him, and he could sit down for a change.
And they had to get a special chair for him to be in that costume.
Which, I mean, that's pretty standard. But, like, most of the time, they just leave you standing there. Like, C-3PO was just stuck in a metal tin, and they, like, fed him smoothies.
Well, they forgot R2-D2.
They did. They forgot the poor guy.
Yeah.
Oh, no. Yeah, so, like, we've come a long way.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
But, like, even nowadays...
One of my favorite things in this commentary, or any of the special features, was watching Doug Jones eat, like, bits of a Subway sandwich through the Pale Man costume.
Because you're in that all day. It takes 5 hours to put on.
Yeah.
And the Pale Man was almost one full, like, piece of latex prosthetic that they had to put on him so that they could get the saggy skin look. Yep. Which meant that, like, he's not taken, like, unlike the Fawn one where, like, he has full mouth range and, like, yeah, he can't see, he can't hear, but at least you can sit and, like, you can nibble on a sandwich. Yeah. The other one, he's just, like, pinching off little pieces of bread and, like, shoving them into his little mouth.
Oh, I just had a horrible thought about not bread, but, like, I wonder, oh, no, we've seen the Pale Man. I was just imagining the Pale Man eating, like, little bits of roasted children. Like that. Horrible.
That'd be terrible.
Yeah. And speaking of terrible stuff, we now cut to seeing the results of General Dickhead's
General Dickhead.
torture, where,
this guy doesn't look good.
He's got a very big slit down his fingers.
Yeah. He'd been peeled.
Yeah, and the doctor's like, fuck, I can't do this anymore, which...
You're supposed to heal this. No, man, you need a doctor. You're the doctor. Oh, fuck, dude, I can't fix that.
Well, it's not even that. The guy's asking for death. The guy doesn't even want to be healed. He's just end it.
Yeah, because if he heals him, he's just going to do it again.
Yeah,
He'll peel his legs next time.
The doctor obliges, because, real quick, from this, we then cut to the Colonel fighting the Mandrake. He gets pissed and finds out that the doctor killed the Frenchman, and because he can't take it out on Ophelia, he takes it out on the good person.
Yes.
Yeah, which Mandrake's death is a little bit sad, but you do really feel bad for the doctor.
It's a really well-played scene where, like, unlike a lot of other scenes where, like, oh, that sucks, but whoa, that sucked more. It all sucks so much that you're just like, ugh, now I just feel awful.
And it's one of those scenes where it's that weird idea of, like, a dignified death where he gets shot in the back but he doesn't collapse. He just takes those couple extra like last little steps of defiance before feeling his chest, seeing the blood and
knowing.
Yeah, it's honestly, it's probably the most heartbreaking death in this movie.
I would agree.
Yeah, but I mean, that's just the nature of war and
Dickhead.
Yeah.
And Captain Dickhead.
Yeah, and it's not even the doctor's fault that he's had to do it. And again, it's something that the Colonel can't control, that he's going to get rid of out of his life. Yeah, he is a sociopath.
He is 100%.
Yeah, killing what he can't control.
That includes the Mandrake, which gets yeeted into the fire.
Yep, which, yeah, I mean.
And does the yeeting of the Mandrake cause anything good to happen? No, it does not.
No.
It triggers the mother to go into terrible childbirth and die.
Yep, which she dies off screen.
She does.
And it looks like Ophelia's going to be sent away. / not really. She's kind of forgotten at this point.
Oh yeah,
like by everyone besides Mercedes.
Yeah, and I think everyone but the Colonel is purposefully trying to forget her.
Mm-hmm.
Because if they can claim like, oh, I totally forgot that she was here, then maybe she'll be okay.
Well, not even that. Like they just don't. There's a lack of giving a shit about her fate.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Where if she starves, so be it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but also, like, I think the few people in the background who, like, not necessarily connect with her, but, like, acknowledge her throughout the movie.
Yeah.
I think those people in their head are like, if we ignore this child, maybe occasionally I can throw her a bone, and she can live, like, a chicken in the backyard or something, and maybe her stepfather will forget she exists, and she can just go live somewhere else.
Yeah. Yeah, you do feel sorry for...
Yeah.
Ophelia, much so at this point. Because even she's not in touch with the baby.
No, she doesn't. It's because of the timing of it all, the baby is whisked away to be the son of the dickhead Waffle.
He's in the office. He's in the gear room. He's already putting his fate in motion.
Exactly.
Because from here, the Colonel confronts Mercedes, and it gets worse for both of them.
Mm-hmm.
Mercedes leaves. And not before giving him a bit of a half Chelsea grin.
Yes.
For those who don't know, it's the Joker injuries.
Just little smile cuts.
Yeah. But she says she'll come back for Ophelia. But she's caught on her way out. Also, Mercedes is a badass.
Yes.
And they go overkill to chase her down with horses. But she is saved by her bro Tato, which...
good timing.
brings me to my favorite part of this commentary. Listening to Del Toro's amazing, seething hatred for horses and cows. Cows aren't even in the movie, but he brings up his hatred for how these things are like the filthiest, worst animals ever. And it's he is
not a fan, and for someone who is in the movie business, that's hilarious because horses are kind of an inescapable sidekick in movies.
Yeah.
Like, they are everywhere. It's really hard to go through multiple movies with not a single horse.
Yeah, the way he talks about horses is like the way I talk about chocolate.
Yes. Pure despise.
Oh, it is great, and I love it. But from here, the pan returns to give Ophelia her one last chance, but she has to bring her brother for the last trial. All the while, the Colonel is sewing his own mouth shut, and...
like the crazy person he is.
And drinking whiskey.
With open wounds!
Yeah.
This man is pouring whiskey into his blood.
Oh, it's...
that would burn so freaking bad.
Oh, yeah.
No, thank you.
He just becomes so terrified. He's completely unhinged at this point.
Oh, it's despite the parallels to the whole Joker bit here, it's so over the top and next level that when you're watching this movie, you don't even make the connection.
No.
There's no question in your mind that this man is 100 times worse than anything Gotham has ever thought of.
Oh, no, he's awful. If he wasn't in the military, he'd probably be a serial killer.
And honestly, this is the part in the movie where when Del Toro mentions that he took some inspiration from Dante's Inferno, that I'm like, yep, I see it. It is this man. This is where you got that.
Yeah, this whole movie is steeped in that crap. Because Ophelia descends through like the kind of layers of in between hell.
And like I think the part that like stuck out for me, and we'll get through that more right here with this trial, is Del Toro mentioned that like the thing that stuck with him from Dante's Inferno was that the lowest pit in hell was reserved for liars and like con artists. Yeah. And he's like, Ophelia is a lot of things, but she is not a liar. No, exactly. And actually, yeah, that's really good because the Colonel the whole time is lying about everything. Everything. He is the worst. Yeah, the rationing, him not having the watch, glossing over how they actually met
or how he actually met Carmen.
Yeah, and I have no doubt in my mind that he will lie to, like, if he got to keep the baby, he would lie to his son about all of it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, exactly. Over-glamorize his life.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in this moment, Ophelia does steal her brother and tries to drug the colonel, but...
She doesn't do a good job.
No. But bomb starts going off much closer. We're actually seeing it in the windows, which is how he sees Ophelia and gives chase. Yeah, and this is where the palettes that we haven't really talked about much in a while are fully blending.
Yes.
And in an interesting way, too, because once we go into the labyrinth, as colorful as it has been, doesn't feel as colorful compared to the bombs and the fantasies of freedom in this world. It feels
like a Twilight almost.
Yeah, very much so. Because we get the very last trial. Ophelia's confronted that she has to give the blood of her brother.
I like this
in
trial
order to open the labyrinth.
Because the fawn mentions that it's not. He doesn't. She's worried that, like, oh, I don't want to hurt him. And the fawn sweetly goes, well, it's just be one drop. We just prick a finger.
Yeah.
Which makes it sound so much less worse.
Yeah. It kind of makes me think of, who was it? What in the Bible? Was it Abraham who had to, like, kill his son for God? Yeah. Yes. It's very much a trial like that.
Yeah. Whereas if she had done what the fawn said, it doesn't sound so bad, blind faith, and then, like, you both get to go. But she will not hurt her brother.
No. And
that's right. Tell him.
And from this, the colonel shows up. We see Ophelia talking to nothing, but all these shots are from his perspective.
And as we know, it's made clear the magic is more available to pure people, and this man is the least pure thing on the planet. So, like, there's no doubt that this guy couldn't see a fawn.
No, exactly.
He's lucky he could even find this place.
Yeah, and because that's the point of the trial, is to see if she's kept her level of purity that is unattainable.
Exactly.
But he shows up, takes the kid, and shoots Ophelia. Yeah. He's finally dealing with probably really the root of his current issues.
In his mind, yeah.
Yeah. And from here, the colonel tries to leave and do what his father did by breaking his watch, and gets rejected so hard.
This is the most perfect rejection for this man.
Oh, it's such a great, like, because they could have let him go on a monologue and then just be like, no, you never will. They cut him off shortly.
They're like, no, dickhead. No one's going to know who you are.
And the moment she says, he'll never know your name, boom.
Bam. Yeah. We're not messing around. You're dead.
He doesn't even have, like, that fraction of a second to, like, really realize that his legacy is dead.
He dies with surprise in his face.
Yeah. And unfortunately, Mercedes finds Ophelia dead now. And which there also brings up this interesting part, because as we kind of end with a lullaby, we hear Ophelia arises in a glamorous world where they're like, that was the trial. You spilled your own blood instead.
Yes.
But there's some interesting things here. So none of the adults ever go into the entranceway. The well itself no one goes down it besides Ophelia.
Oh, that's a good point.
So there's very much that idea of the child's imagination running wild.
Yeah.
But at the same time, as we've talked about in the magical thought of everything, that what you make your own reality, and that's very much how kids' minds work, is that they are creating their own reality regardless of what's happening around them, but they're being influenced by it. Of like, maybe she went into this labyrinth, saw this well to nowhere, and that's where her story started coming from, and that's where this world she was trying. It was her way to escape, kind of way. But also, there's something interesting as well, is that the king's crown is rather horn-like.
Yes, it is.
Even though the fawn says that it was him overlooking Ophelia and the daughter, and the child, I kind of question who really is the king.
And I think that's a good thing you picked up on. Because a lot of people had made note, and Del Toro's never really said anything about it. And whether or not he meant it, or whether or not it's happy accident, the fact that the same person plays both the fawn and the Pale Man.
Mm-hmm.
And it's implied the frog, that means that, like, and the mother gets to go from human world to magic world. A lot of people have made the infersion that the fawn is all of the characters the entire time.
Okay.
So you're not the only one who's spotted that.
Yeah, it's interesting because also that baby in the statue had horns. Double meanings of the king has a crown of horns.
Yeah.
So it's the son of the king still because the mom has a baby in her hands.
Yes.
So I don't know. It's an interesting scene. And this is the most colorful scene we've had too.
Yeah, and it's a really great ending because depending on your mindset, depending on how you watched this movie,
Mm-hmm.
it is, like you said, either all in her head and this is her death and her fantasy, or like how Del Toro watched it and saw it, this is how she gets to the very real underworld.
Yeah, and I will get to it because there are some fantastic quotes that Del Toro has that very much is and here's the thing is like a lot of directors are like, oh yeah, this is it because it is. He's like, no, here's my reasoning why this is my truth to the movie.
Yes.
You may interpret it differently, but here's how I see it. And that's why I like that he's very amicable about like giving his evidence and then saying here's why I believe what I believe.
Yes.
Cuz from her being resurrected or awakening in the underground world, again, the reversal of the only time we've seen the full underground world has been dead looking.
Exactly.
We've cut to her dying in the real world and her nose bleeding in the opposite direction of what we saw in the beginning while Mercedes cries over her.
Mm-hmm.
But then we cut to the tree returning, the
tree blooming,
fig releasing a flower, and honestly, the last traces of Ophelia left on the world.
I mean, it's the last portal.
Yeah. And we get the final credit roll.
Yeah.
Like, this is where we get the title card. It's taken us an entire movie to get to the title card.
Yes.
But yeah, and like we talked about, the movie is a lot about death and birth, but I like how Del Toro describes it, is that the movie is not about dying, but about giving birth to who you want to be. Again, with those magical thoughts and ideas of you are who you pretend to be.
Yeah.
But he also left the ending a bit open, and he admits that. But he stated that he thinks she is reborn. And I also think he says it best as well, that immortality is the act of refusing death and refusing giving any importance to death. Only if you dare to die do you reach immortality.
Yeah,
and,
which is a parallel of the story she tells at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah, and as you've hinted at before, he also states that you are who you think you are as long as you are genuine.
Yeah, which is Ophelia to a T.
Exactly. And back to the Colonel, and an interesting thought as well. And I think it's how Marcus Parks from last podcast on the left put it. He said, be careful who you pretend to be.
Yes, because you will end up being them.
Exactly. And that's what happens with the Colonel.
Yep.
And because he's been lying about who he really is, he probably has some feelings, but he's been suppressing it. Especially the way, and I think it's apparent in the way Carmen talks about like how they've met, is that maybe he does have those moments to him.
Yeah.
But because he's trying to portray this image of who he wants to be,
yeah,
he's lying about everything now. And it's obvious that he does care about his legacy and his dad's legacy because he has the watch still.
Yeah. It very much implies that in a different world, in a different timeline, maybe he would have been a good person and a true love to Carmen and potentially a good stepdad.
Yeah.
But his father lied to him and he has lied to himself, and it's just progressed until it made a monster.
Yep, exactly. And the ideology that he's under, and
yeah,
there's a lot to him. And I think part of it is in Pan's Labyrinth, Del Toro mentions that you can only maintain archetypes or deconstruct them in fairy tales.
Yes.
And I think his adherence really to following those fairy tale types is that he allows them to be who they are.
Mm-hmm.
They're surface level if you want them to be.
Yes.
And that's exactly, and we've gone into the heavily analytical stuff, but we've also at the same time allowed them to be and put our own thoughts on them.
Yeah, and that's one of the real joys of this movie, and why I think for a lot of people, even though this might not be the recurring favorite film that they've ever had, when they saw it, they recognized it as like, wow, that was actually a really good movie, even if it's not your style of movie.
Oh, yeah. And, I mean, to an extent, all the characters are at crossroads in their movie, in this movie. And so, and as I've watched it multiple times through the years, I've been identifying with different characters differently as I'm growing.
Sure.
So it's very much a fairy tale about crossroads at the same time. And so, like, I think that's what's great is that we're able to imprint ourselves on these characters as we mature ourselves.
Yeah.
And I know we've discussed it ad nauseum, but I think it's also important to make just talk how fantastic this movie is, and I think Del Toro puts it the best. And the ending tells you nothing about Del Toro, but it tells you about yourself.
Yeah.
That the fairy tale just happens, and they're not judgmental.
Yeah. And I think that influences how you, like, end up at your conclusion at the end.
Exactly. And I think that's great as a director of being like, hey, I've made this, but it has a life of its own. It's its own thing. And very much so in some of my favorite movies are very much so like that, like Eraserhead, Tetsuo the Iron Man, Stalker. Like, it's these very open-ended movies of like, well, did this shit happen? Is it real? Or like, I don't know. There's just so much to Pan's Labyrinth, and I think it is a gift to the world that Del Toro did this movie.
Oh, for sure. And the last little trivia piece that I have for this movie is that in the credits, kind of far down, it says Stick Insects, and they are credited as Cheech and Chong, and it says afterwards, may they rest in peace.
Oh yeah, that is, they actually brought in stick bugs to study them for the CGI.
But it also correlates to how many fairies died.
Oh shit. I did not put those two and two together. I know they had brought up that the stick bugs had died in production because they don't live long. But...
No, they do not live long. But it's nice to think that they named two of the fairies.
Yeah. No, I don't know. Pan's Labyrinth is just one of those. It's weirdly nostalgic because I didn't see it fully until I was in college, honestly.
Even the first time you watch this, you have that nostalgic feeling for no goddamn reason.
Well,
other than the fairy tale tropes, which are so strong.
Well, and I think that's its strong suit is that because I won't say it's a movie for all ages.
No, definitely not.
Definitely preteens could watch it, I'd say. There'd be the couple parts, the fascist bashing the dude's face in, and some little gory bits where it's probably like, hey, cover your eyes at this.
I would say if you're a horror preteen, I think you'd probably be good.
Yeah.
If you're not into that, there'd be some scenes where you're like, oh no, I'm good.
But I think why Pan's Labyrinth is so good is partly due to Del Toro's complete dedication and understanding of fantasy and fairy tales.
Yes.
And also
it's so well-rounded.
But also being able to make a movie set in a very modern setting while still feeling old and fanciful.
Yes.
Because for me, it has very similar... not really style, but attempts as Spirit of the Beehive.
Okay, yeah.
Which is also about the Spanish Civil War. But a girl taking on a more modern fairy tale of Frankenstein.
Yeah.
Specifically the 1931 Frankenstein movie.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have that same charm. There's the motifs, there's a lot of stuff there to it that's Pan's Labyrinth has as well. But it doesn't tap into the multicultural, like, love of it.
Yeah.
Because Spirit of the Beehive is, like, one of 2 or 3 historical-based movies that I've seen where I didn't know anything about the history behind it. Same with A Brighter Summer Day, where I feel I would appreciate it more if I knew the history behind the movie. And that's one thing with Del Toro putting the text at the beginning of Pan's Labyrinth that circumnavigates all that stuff of having to know it. Because in... A Brighter Summer Day, it ends with saying, hey, all this was a real case. Like, all this shit supposedly happened.
Yeah. And
it led to one of the most controversial Taiwanese criminal cases. Mm-hmm. And same with Spirit of the Beehive. I don't think that one has any context to it besides you supposing to know it takes place right after this Civil War.
Yeah, and that is one of the things that really does make this film stand out, even though it's a small detail, is that knowing the war helps.
Yeah.
But you don't need it.
Exactly.
You don't need it because our villain is so villainous.
Exactly. He's very much fairy tale. He's almost the ideal fascist.
He's the ideal fairy tale villain.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't matter what story he's in. It doesn't matter what time period he's in. He is evil.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it's. I think Pan's Labyrinth is going to be one of those movies that's going to resurface again in
definitely.
a few years, especially once people start going back into Del Toro's filmography, since he just came out with another movie and his Pinocchio movie is supposed to release at the end of this year.
And honestly, this is one of the movies that I think people are going to go back to and they're going to be able to rewatch without a whole lot of trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of his more fanciful works, while they always, I think, for the most part, look good,
yeah,
this is one of the few ones that still looks amazing.
Yeah.
Like, Hellboy, I love it dearly. You cannot deny that it has aged a little.
Yeah.
It's not aged much, but you can start to feel the time period in it. You can start to feel the crust around the CGI.
Yeah.
This one, you don't.
Well, and honestly, if you do look back at least from what I remember of watching the other two movies in this quote-unquote trilogy, Kronos has dated a little bit. Some of the effects aren't as good, but you can see the maturing of Del Toro's own work. Because you've also got, what's the bug movie he did? Mimic.
Yes.
Mimic, and then you've got, even in The Devil's Backbone, there's some stellar CGI in that.
Yeah.
But Devil's Backbone has aged a bit too. I think, again, and I'm always going to harp on this, it's the practical effects.
Yes.
They always might be aged in some regards, because the CGI in this movie has aged a bit.
It has.
But not as bad as some.
No, and honestly, it's one of those things where, like, you are so focused on everything else happening, you don't notice.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I mean, I guess at the end of it all, Chris, do you recommend giving Pan's Labyrinth a watch?
Oh, yeah, every day. Even if you've watched it, but it's been a while, if you watched it when it won awards, you need to rewatch it. Yeah,
no, I completely agree with that. I mean, this movie is as well known for a reason.
Yeah.
And me, especially going through it, for me, it's kind of like going back through Eraserhead in some of these movies that I haven't seen in a while. Just
you forget how good they are.
Forget how good they are, but also viewing them with a different lens in your life. Of when I remember watching this movie, I forgot about Mercedes for the most part.
Yeah, you kind of do, especially the first time you watch it, because you're so focused on the visuals, I think.
And Ophelia's story takes center front, even though the movie is very evenly both the real war story and the fantasy. Oh, definitely. Yeah, this is a delightful one to come revisit, even if you've watched it before. Oh yeah, hell yeah. Definitely go down this well of a movie. Yeah, and now that you know that there's more things to look for, I think that helps too. Yeah, and hell, I even say go back and rewatch Kronos or Devil's Backbone if you haven't seen them yet. Yeah, they are fun. They're both good in their own right, but I don't think they'll have the same staying power as Pan's Labyrinth. No, I don't think so. Yeah, so yeah, definitely go watch Pan's Labyrinth. I think that's a unanimous decision. Definitely. So, but anywho, this has been The Good, the Bad, and the Weird. Thanks for listening. Peace.